So I trust everyone was able to finish your exam in time?
Yes.
Good job. So this week we'll be working on validity of African philosophy. And this is something, a topic that we briefly touched on a few weeks ago during the PhD student presentations, if you all recall.
Yeah.
The idea of, is our focus going to be on the value of our own systems of thought, or perhaps should we focus on what Europeans say about African thought? Do we have African thought? Do we have African philosophy? Do we qualify? Things of this nature. In that context, we are talking about in relation to African art, if you recall.
Yes.
Oh, first off, I'm being rude. I think we have some guests in the class.
Yeah.
So Moses, I know you can also introduce our guests.
Moses Santiago, and this is Michael St. George, musician and poet.
Moses, you didn't tell us where you're from.
He also from Jamaica.
Moses Santiago, I'm around a member of the African Youth Improvement Foundation and a musician at the University of Ghana. Cameroon is one of our resource persons, so
So please join me in welcoming them.
Welcome.
Very good. African welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah, so this is an ongoing course entitled Foundations of African Thought, where we go into African philosophy, African worldview, and really get at what it is that we mean when we're talking about African thought. That we find previously in literature elsewhere that there's an idea that there's such a diversity of African thought, it's just a hodgepodge of people. Some people say this superstition is here, this myth is there. Well, what we're looking at are the fundamental and core ideas that link all of these understandings together into what we can refer to as African thought. So for this week, we're going to look at the idea of the validity of African philosophy. Now, up to this point, we've been dealing with things such as creation stories, such as various ideas on morality, ethics, all these different things. So we've all this time been articulating actually what this African thought is. What do we mean when we say African thought? For this week, what we're going to look at is some of the challenges to what we've already been covering. In that, in the literature, Europeans will say, okay, you don't have philosophy, you have no philosophy. Or African scholars say, no, we don't have African philosophy, look at it, it's just a hodgepodge of, myths or whatever. So we're going to look at rebutting that. And what I referred to earlier was this idea that when we're talking about African thought, sometimes we can get caught up in just trying to answer, respond to, or silence critics. That at the end of the day, we've never actually even touched on what African thought is. They say, you don't have it. Yes, we do. Oh, well, they said it in a mean way. Look, they said it in a mean way, and all we're talking about is what the Europeans have said. But if there's anything useful or valid in it, let's actually bring forth that usefulness and that validness. Now, the students had a take-home exam, and as a few minutes ago, I had Idrisu, who turned his in yesterday. Also, Yao Asai also turned his in. As for the others, I see them busily hammering at their computers. some awahin, biwahin, doing the in-pecking techniques. Others I see, readily going through. It was an open book and open note exam, and also encouraged them to work together on it. Because as opposed to trying to weed them out and flunk them, I wanted to give them a chance to really understand it and share their thoughts and ideas, right? And my reward for that is that they are finishing in class. I'll take that in their last minute. So today's, oh, no problem, no problem. So that by way of our introduction and a little bit of African hospitality, I hope we can tell. So what we're dealing with is the idea of the validity of African philosophy. So when we talk about African philosophy, there's been an ongoing debate as to whether African belief systems constitute philosophy, and it has consumed energy to the detriment of examining the systems themselves. This is exactly what we're talking about. Some European sitting somewhere in the butt crack of Eurasia and said, you don't have it. Oh, yes, we do. You don't have it. Oh, yes, we do. And we try to hold it up to them. Now, in literature, I think, in terms of the Harlem Renaissance, things like this in the United States, from that point, and even a little before, you have this ongoing debate about who our audience is and who our audience needs to be as African people. And, it's been hashed out, but somehow each generation we get caught up in it to some degree or another. Who is our audience? Why are we trying to convince Europeans who have their own ulterior motives for saying it in the first place? You understand? So when you're saying, yes, we do, what they hear that as is, that means I'm not as good as I think I am. And they do not want to come up off of their high horse. That's their entire self, their identity, all that is connected to Greeks invented something. So if you try to pull that from under them, they have a problem, a knee-jerk reaction. No, please don't. My very survival depends on this lie that I've woven together and that I'm standing on right now. So now you're trying to convince them that basically what they consider to be their breath of life itself, they should stop breathing it in. And of course, we run into problems because they're not trying to do that. So as opposed to engaging in such a fruitless mission, it may be more fruitful for us to talk to ourselves. Because we also don't know this information and try to, if there's anything valuable in it, let me share this value with my African brother. Let me share this value with my African sister. If there's anything intrinsic about our morality, our conceptions, our understanding, our cosmology, well, now let's actually use that to build, as opposed to perhaps focusing unduly on trying to convince our past, current, and or former enemies about this. So here we are. We're looking at also this idea that the time could have been spent better researching into African thought itself. As I did a presentation this morning, which I think some of you were able to attend. So that lets me know at least two of you did. Yeah. So yes. Now, as I was asking people, have you heard about these different arts? I named this one, I named that one. I didn't see very many hands, right? Perhaps we would have had more hands if we would have devoted time to what are our resources, what are our raw materials throughout the African continent. As opposed to that, we've been trying to dissect what the Greeks did, what the Romans did, what the British, what the French did, right? And I like to use the analogy of sifting through vomit, right? So they came, got all of our stuff, they ate it down, they went back to their place, they vomited it up. This is Dr. Yosef Ben-Yakinen's analogy. So now what we're trying to do is looking at this same vomit and trying to pick out African spices. Oh, look, they got that from us. Oh, look. As opposed to going back to read our original recipe, which we etched and carved into stone, right? And going to the garden and making our own feast. We're trying to deal with what they have vomited back up, right? So, again, perhaps we would know more about our own things if previous generations would have focused more on that. Now, that's not to say that they completely wasted their time, because if nothing else, at the very least, you can say that they've let us know how fruitless that is. We wouldn't know that that's not something that we should spend all of our time doing unless they did it themselves, right? So again, just different ideas. So again, that could have been spent researching into African thought rather than dealing with whether it exists or satisfies Western conditions. So do we have African philosophy? Let's prove it to them. What's your definition, European? Okay, all right, well, let me try to fit it into your thoughts, right? Also, Kamalu deals with this in terms of philosophy in a broader sense, as a search for meaning or explanation of existence. All human beings, without exception, engage in this. Mythical accounts of creation and so forth and so on. All of those show that people are pondering what is existence, right? What's the meaning of life, right? Our notions about destiny, right? How can you have a notion about destiny without some level of philosophy and abstraction? Now, what Europeans try to do is they try to define it into the tiniest box so they can say, look, the Greeks invented it, right? So I say philosophy is, I don't know, having curly hair and wearing your toga like that. That's philosophy. And as long as they can define it in such narrow terms, now we can say, look, the Greeks had it, right? These are very blatant and very simplistic, ridiculous things almost, but it seems less silly when we're living it out. You have perhaps a classics department that starts with Greece, right? We're suffering because of, people taking this up to be the case. Also, philosophy is not used to refer to strictly logic as a discipline. That's a subset of philosophy in terms of those overarching objectives and goals. Searching for the meaning of existence, the meaning of life, those types of things. So you can use formal logic as one method of doing that, but there are so many other things that you can do. So what Eurasians refer to as philosophy as a whole is just one form of logic called deductive logic. So this revolves around ideas of implicational principles. A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C, and things like this. So you have formal logic, having all of these different types of things. And they also, in linguistics, they attempt to apply this also to semantics as well, formal semantics. So deductive logic, again, is only one means of searching for an explanation of existence through reason. And deductive logic, we find, is also present in Africa, but not emphasized as the only type of logic that exists, right? We also find other types of philosophy in the forms of what's referred to as dialectical reasoning based on the concept of complementary opposites, such as those outlined by Sheikh Anta Diop. So this deals with being and nothingness, right? Finite and the infinite, matter and emptiness, natural and supernatural. And you saw this in some of the quotes that if we're saying that by the existence of the Supreme Being that brings about good, then that exact same existence must have brought about its opposite, right? In the Bambara creation story, that out of Fu arose Gla, and then from that came Dia, right? So if I come into existence, my opposite also comes into existence, because otherwise my existence is meaningless. So these are pure concepts of the spirit, and they seem to have a priori obviousness. We also found the idea of analogy as prominent and inherent in African philosophy, which suggests rather than guarantees truth. You can find this especially in Proverbs, right? Useful for fundamental problems of philosophy rigidly defined by deductive reasoning, paradoxes, or contradictions, right? So, Asantrofiano Maya Wabenye. Santrofiano Maya Wabenye Ufana Musio Ujana Sadio Santrofiano Maya Wabenye. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Right, you know the song, if you can explain it.
Santrophy is a bed. And among the I can't believe It's an animal that if you grab it,
So bird that is.
a bird, if you grab it, they believe you have collected something precious, and if you left it to go to, you have left something precious. So it is some sort of a paradox.
It's a paradox, but the first one, yeah,
the first one is if you take it, there is a calamity.
Right, because there's a taboo, you're not supposed to hunt it, you're not supposed to kill it, right? So it serves a function. So if you take it, you've done something wrong. But if you leave it, let's say you're hungry and you want to feed your family, then you've left something precious, just as Buckle mentioned, right? So this is a paradox that's here encapsulated in this proverb. This is a philosophy. You can take that exact same proverb and come up with a theoretical or conceptual framework about and apply it to anything: economics, political science, sociology, right? Any paradox that has a similar type of analogy, you can take that idea and now you can say this is central theory of economics, right? And this is, in this morning's presentation, that's what I was attempting to bring out, that as we're talking about divination itself, right? The divination can be understood as a theory. Things change or stay the same. Why do things transform? If I know that this is what it is, then I can say, let me acquiesce and keep to that. If I'm ignorant of it, then I can say, let me resist it. That all of these different forms can play a part. And you can look at all of these things as contributing to transformation or contributing to stability, right? So anything that we look at in the African context, you can abstract from that and say, I can apply this to African combat sciences. I can apply this to social phenomena. I can apply this to art, right? So when you're talking about frameworks, basically all you're dealing with is analogies. The rat race is a game of cat and mouse, right? All that is analogies, and now you're taking that analogy and spreading it out in society. I gave an example in undergrad. Someone gave an analogy that he said it can be used to describe the whole world. And people were like, okay, what's he going to talk about? He said, in the whole world, everything is nothing but pimps and hoes. And then he went on to articulate what he meant. People at the end of the thing, they gave him ovation. Because he's saying either you're in power, right, or you're being victimized by those who are in power, right? So he's saying that I'm looking at these types of power dynamics and I'm going to apply it to every single thing. My teacher and my students. All right? That's what I'll apply it to. So as ridiculous as it is, he has come up with this thing from a rap song and now made it a conceptual framework for understanding reality. So what we're talking about is knowledge creation. Of course, you don't have to go to something as vulgar as something like that. But in any one of these proverbs, you can see that this is what I can use this for. If you see a gold weight, you can say this is now my conceptual framework for my thesis. Right? So again, useful for fundamental problems of philosophy rigidly defined by deductive reasoning, paradoxes, or contradictions. Also, according to Appiah, he talks about common elements in belief systems throughout the world include ideas of beauty, causation, evil, God, God's illusion, justice, knowledge, life, meaning, mind, person, reality, reason, right, truth, understanding, and wrong. Right? So he's saying in any culture that you go to, you'll find either those things specifically or cognate ideas in that family of, ideas. This is dealing with the idea of family resemblances. So as opposed to trying to define something in order to identify it, you can look at it in terms of a prototype. And in the prototype, anything in that general family can fall in the prototype. So if I say, define a game, what is a game? Very quickly, anyone, what is a game? What defines a game?
Winning is accidental.
Winning.
Yes.
Okay.
Winning.
Okay, so in a game you can win.
Yes.
All right. Are there any games where there's no clear winner and no clear loser, but it still qualifies as a game to you?
What about playing our and another?
Say again?
An individual playing our or something.
Okay, so let's say one person playing OR or one person playing chess. Who won and who lost? It's the same person who's doing it. So if we're trying to define games just based on winning and losing, we may leave some out. Now this is what is called defining the problem away. And in academia, people like to do this. That just so that I can say that what I'm dealing with is the thing, let me define away all the things that don't neatly fit into my box. And Mama Marimba Ani, Dr. Marimba Ani, she talks about this in terms of European ideas of dichotomization and compartmentalization. So if I can define this, and you look to Aristotle and Greek thought for this idea of necessary and sufficient conditions, if and only if it has this, then it is this. If it has feathers, therefore it is a bird. So what about a man in a feather costume? Chicken soup. Right? But you're trying to define it. So, okay, well now we need to change our definition slightly. If it does that and can fly, okay, well what about a bat that I'll take feathers onto? Does it count? So now you keep trying to change your definition, change your definition, as opposed to looking at all these birds in terms of perhaps, here's what I mean prototypically, then you have, gradually coming further apart from what that idea is, all the way to the fuzzy boundaries, right, where the line is blurred. So coming back to birds, what may be a prototypical bird for you? Ostrich? No. Chicken is a prototypical bird. Okay. Some people would think something that flies would be the prototypical bird. Now chickens can fly, not very far. You see them up at night, roosting somewhere. Say, how did you get there? I thought chickens couldn't fly. It's like you must have grown up in the city, right? So, if we're looking at it, a lot of people may think of something like a sparrow, right? Any of those that can do those types of things. Now you get further and further away from it. So ostrich is very far from that. It's running, it's not flying, right? But you can get closer than that. You can say, all right, parrot, right? But it does something weird. It talks. Not all birds talk like that, all right? So it may be not quite in the center, but it's slightly off because it can still fly. It still has the beak and all these prototypical things. What about a penguin?
No.
Right, it's not going to be in our center. It may be somewhere around there. So you can say in this you have a category. And even in your construction of the category, you're using some logic. We'll come back to that point. Okay? Asako. You will not fall asleep today. So again, concepts that bear family resemblance to these. Also, concepts are necessary for any action. Right? So if I'm saying I'm going to plant, a seed, you have to have some type of concept that something is going to come out from this action that you're doing. I'm going to kill this person. You have to have some concept of life and death, right? Or transformation from one stage to another. Any of those things, to do whatever you're doing, there's some concept that's driving it. That I'm going to sit here, you may have some type of concept of rest as opposed to activity. If you're just going to sit here, well, why not just hop up and down for the next 5 hours, right? Because you have some concept that will be draining. Let me conserve my energy. Well, then you have a concept of energy. And what's the energy coming from? You have a concept that you need to do something to sustain your energy, right? So whatever you do, these are things that people think about consciously, subconsciously, however you are thinking about it. Also, the existence of social norms implies concepts of something approaching good, evil, right, wrong, whatever you're going to phrase it as, right? There's also ideas that there's no such thing as ethno-philosophy, rather philosophies from various cultures and worldviews. So as we talk about this, does Britain have ethno-philosophy? Not according to them. But if you're looking at any type of definition that you're going to look broadly across the world, then you would say, well, that's their ethnic group, and that's the philosophy of that ethnic group. Now, another thing that Europeans attempt to do is look at their experience and call it universal, right? So when we're in a university and you're talking about universalism, the objective, the end game of the European is to say that what they do is universal. So we found this in linguistics, right? Where, you know, specific branches of linguistics, when we talk about, we're trying to analyze human language and what human beings know about language. So we'll write it in English, and either consciously or subconsciously we're comparing anything to how English works. So if a language has a completely different structure, you say, well, the underlying deep structure is like English, but then you have transformations that got it to be like this African one, right? So again, what's the paradigm? So to some degree, they're saying that the European, this is what they talk about Eurocentrism, the European is at the center, and then everything else we'll say is universal. So when we say universal, we're taking that. Now, in actuality, if you want to talk about something being universal, like for example, language amongst humans, right? I was looking at a documentary about the Jawara people of the Andaman Islands, and it's thought that they migrated out of Africa about 60,000 years ago, right? Now, if we're talking about language, and these people have been isolated from everyone else for about 60,000 years, this means that that was something that African people worked out prior to 60,000 years ago, right? So if we're saying that language is something universal, it means that we worked it out as Africans, and whatever else you all have is just to what degree did you stray away from this original universal humanness, right? Did you de-evolve, or whatever you did transform to be something different? Asakon. Very good. Those who didn't attend the lecture this morning, who are looking at the video, will be like, what's this? Just a teaching technique, perhaps. And in the text, Kamalu gives ideas about arithmetic as their perspectives on the same phenomenon. So in Europe, they have a decimal system of counting. That is, people count in tens, right? So 10, 20, 30, 40, we know this one, right? But is that universal? Anyone? Does everyone count in tens?
No.
No. What are other systems? Counting in fours. Can anyone give me examples of any language groups that use something different? Chi Wolof, Juron, then you different deco. So in Wolof, it's base 5 is what is used.
Isn't there a system that you
Exactly, and we mentioned this before. So some of you are falling asleep. Asakon. You should remember that. Base 20 for Yoruba. Alright, so Ogun, Ogoji, Ogota, Ogorin, Ogorun, Ogofa, Ogoji, Ogojo, Ogosan, Ogowa, Kabi Igba. So all of that saying, how many 20s do you have? So you're saying 20, 40, 60, 80, and then even the 10s in between is how far are you away from this 20 or that one, right? So among the Dogon, they counted 8s, because remember the 8 normal. So whatever they do it also in alignment with that original first 8, right? Amongst the Akan, they use what? Anyone?
8. Use the 10.
Base 10?
Base 10.
Yeah. So a do, a do or no. A driasa. The do inside of the adriasa is saying do 10. How many of them? Some? 3 of them. Adria 9, would do a num, and so forth and so on. I had num, I had some, and so forth and so on. So also Claudia Zalapsky notes the majority of African numeration systems are quinary subtraction. 60 minus what equals 48?
12.
Right? So you have multiples of 12, right? Now, just to let you know that this is intentional that I'm working with 12s, I'm going to subtract 12 to get you to this number, so that's the significance of all this total together. Now, also, there was another bone that was found subsequently that talked about, or that showed arithmetic of how to convert from base 10 to base 12. Right? So this is what your African ancestors were doing 20,000 years ago. And you're looking at it like, oh, look at these things. Now, another thing that's significant is that these are baboon fibulas. Right? Baboon. And we'll come back to this idea of a logical category. So you see different things here. What do they have in common? Can you see? Should I bigify it for you? Let's look here. This is Djibouti. This is what's called an ibis bird. Also how Djibouti was represented. Here you see the menstrual cycle, dark moon, new moon, full moon, all the way to waning moon. This is the animal associate, another one of the animals associated with Djibouti, which is a baboon. Here's a baboon, and baboons do what? They howl at what? The moon. So, animal associated with Djibouti. Djibouti was also associated with what? Celestial body. If you're paying attention, you would say the moon. Right? So again, this is one of my colleagues, Bangolame, who brought this to my attention. But when you see the ibis bird, this is like the crescent moon. So it's associated with the lunar deity here, right? You can see this. Also the baboon associated with the moon. The idea that both the baboon, the ibis bird associated with the moon, and then the moon associated with the menstrual cycle. So this is what you can call a logical category. So not only are we going to show you this mathematics, we're going to use a baboon's fibula in both cases, 20,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, to let you know that this is something that we're doing intentionally. The baboon is associated with the moon, so let's let you know that we know we're associating this with the moon. This is dealing with calculating menstrual cycles, so let's do this, all this moon stuff together to let you know that this is intentional as a category, right? And now we have a deity of the moon. How are we going to write that down? How are we going to write that down? The lunar deity. Oh, I hope you're coming across how profound this is.
Yeah.
Because this is a level of abstract thinking beyond anything I could just come up with. Right? So-called PhD, I couldn't get a baboon fibula, do my prime numbers, and then put a quartz stone in one end and let you know that this is what this is and link it to this. Then have a deity associated with the moon that's also associated with the baboon. This is a profound thought among African people. Also, in terms of arithmetic, this is how it was done. Do I have a pen here today? Do I have a class rep? People are devouring the pens in this room. I don't know why. It must be delicious. All right. So here we have arithmetic in Medu So we have 1 as 1 stroke, 2 as 2 strokes, all the way up to 9 strokes, right? Then you have 10. Hope you're following along. 100. So this is base 10. So if we're saying, oh, Europeans have base 10, well, where did they get base 10 from? Right? If you're sitting in a cave clubbing each other upside the head with, whatever, what are you using base 10 for? Or I clubbed 10 babies to death today. What is that? But if you are African, this is what you're using the base 10 for. This is where the Europeans got their base 10. So we shouldn't relinquish base 10 and say, oh, that's for Europeans. Where did they get it from? 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million. And then you come up with every other number based on these basic ones, these fundamental foundational ones. right? So with this, I found a pen. One way, so can someone write for me? You devoured all the ink too. Okay, we're coming with an actual working pen. Okay, that's good enough. Can someone write the number 11 for me?
Oh, maybe I'm making the meeting. Kindness.
Are you writing it in Ghana?
Writing is a
Yes, a marker. Yes, a marker.
That's a marker.
Oh, but you can see what I've written.
Oh, no one can see.
It's not in Ghana.
Oh, beautiful. Excellent. So that's 11. And you can read this from left to right or right to left. So the 10 first, then the 1, or 10 first, and then the 1. Can someone write, and this is what I work on with my daughter so that she can see this, you know, just one thing to say, oh, we invented mathematics. Do the mathematics then, right? So let's do 203. Anyone?
203. 203. Oh, really?
That is a math teacher.
It's 100, eh?
Yeah.
No, it's 1,000.
This is enough to buy you a car.
Basic math teacher.
So we can read it this way, or we could do it the other way and do it this way. Excellent. All right. How would I say 1,100,000?
That's right.
Yeah. It was very functional art, right?
The 1 million and
100,000. Very good. So you can see how you do multiplication. When you say 200, then you show 200, which is actually what 200 is saying, right? And oftentimes, even in English, we don't think about the base 10 nature of this thing. So I say 20, the twin part means 2, the T means 10. 30, 40, 50, right? You just take it for granted, that's just the name of the thing, without thinking that it breaks down to a similar way of when you're saying, so on. Very good. We'll come back to this so that everyone can learn how to calculate in the language that your ancestors invented, right? So we continue.
so what is the system called in African culture?
This is all how you write Medu Neter. This is how you would write, you know, arithmetic inside of Medu Neter. So I hope everyone recognizes this is the writing system, Medu Neter.
We call it a millionaires and numbers system.
Yeah. And then Ovinga, he also talks about concept that they had associated with the number system as well. So such as, you know, a correct method of calculation like Tepkasev, they had an entire vocabulary associated with doing calculations, doing it in the correct method of operations, all those types of things. Now, we're coming back here to Kamaru. So Kamaru is critiquing or offering commentary on various continental African scholars and non-African scholars. He talks about Appiah, that should be Anthony Appiah, where he talks about many African societies have as much in common with traditional societies that are not African as with each other. Now this is interesting, that at a certain point in time, Europeans lumped us all together. They said all of you are potential enslavement victims, potential colonial subject. They said that all of you are one thing, right? Now they do something different. Now they say all of you all are different things, right? Oh, you're all so diverse. Let's celebrate your diversity. That we have to be clear that there's a consistent theme that regardless of what Europeans do, it's always in their own interests. So when it serves their interest to lump you all into one thing, that's what they do. When it serves their interest to say all of you all are different things, that's what they do. So they're not wedded to any of those things. We mentioned last week that they will say, okay, racism today, capitalism tomorrow, whatever ism the day after that, that they are committed to what their overall goals are in terms of their survival, right? So now you see Appiah saying, towing the line of what Europeans say now, look, we're all so diverse, right? It's just, you have Africans here, and look, you have people in India, China, in Canada, whatever, so it's all just, whatever. So we don't need to say there's anything like African philosophy, right? So again, as opposed to getting caught up into, is it one thing, is it different things, let's think in terms of African people, right? At this point in time, when there's this idea of it's just a hodgepodge of whatever, what Kamala was doing is showing that underneath all of them you have a shared worldview, right? But, especially scholars who are in places like Harvard, Oxford, who are paid by Europeans, they told the Europeans line. Whatever Europeans say at this time, they'll say that. If before they said we're all the same, they would say that at that point in time. So again, you have to beware and be aware of African thought in the sense of that which is useful, beneficial for African people. Not in the sense of just any random thing any continental African happens to say, or anyone with a continental African last name happens to say, let's say that that's African thought now, right? Why are you saying it? In what context? For whose ultimate benefit are you saying this now? Right? Anyway, he says, this Kamalu, this does not preclude the fact that the overwhelming majority of African societies have more in common with each other than with non-African societies. And this is the basis on which African philosophy is valid. So again, we're talking about the validity of African philosophy. So what Europeans do in order to, again, pat themselves on the back and say we're the only ones who have philosophy, they say, look, this is just, random stuff, ideas and opinions and whatever, mythologies. This is nothing like a philosophy. So there's no such thing as African philosophy. But then by the same token, they'll say, and in European philosophy, or Greek philosophy, right? Beware of non-Africans and anti-Africans when they come bearing gifts. So the term African philosophy is not to deny the diversity and difference of thought, but it shows that just like in the instructions of, in the book of Going Forth by Day, the idea of the Supreme Being as being one with many arms, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about African philosophy, that you have one, but various manifestations of it, right? Also specifically, African concepts deserving philosophical study. Now what, again, Europeans attempt to do in this day and age, and they may shift it next week, right? What they do in this day and age is say that these European things are universal, but as soon as you start saying something is African, they say, hold on, that's universal too, right? Now we have to interrogate this notion of universalism, because again, when we're talking about universalism means we're all humans, which means at one point in time we're all Africans. So your quest for universalism is only how human have you stayed? After mating with Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago, have you retained these essential human characteristics? If you did, then it's universal. But when we're understanding universalism from our perspective, that is coterminous with saying that something is African, and that is also coterminous with saying that something is human, right? So now if you want to find it in Europe, you say, oh, look, they still retain certain human features, despite having been mixed with Neanderthals. And there are studies that say that Europeans, non-Africans, have as much as 6 to 7% Neanderthal DNA, right? So again, when we're talking about universalism, what exactly are we arguing for? There's a need, however, of describing reclaimed traditions, and this is to some degree what we still have even right here in African studies, where we do ethnographic studies. We say, look, this is what the people do. They bend down, they stand up, they move to the left, they move to the right. I'm done with my study. Right? Not, that simplistic, but basically we're looking at what goes on and we're describing it. And the parallel here is when we look at mining. Asakun. 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 Wonderful. What goes on with mining? We go, we get our raw materials, and then we deliver it up to the so-called West for them to process further. We have to some degree something like mining scholarship, right? Where we go to our village, we see blah, 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 and then we say, look, that proves that your theory, Mr. Westman, is correct, right? At what point in time are we going to do that value adding that we talk about in terms of our own natural resources? But what about our intellectual resources? As we talked about this morning, what about our warfare and combat resources, right? Is our goal in scholarship just to take something and then hand it over? Perhaps it shouldn't be, but that's what we're paid to do when you get a grant, right? So at what point in time do we start to fund ourselves to our own ends and to our own benefits? Because, if you see someone, not to point any fingers, but you'll see someone on a Fulbright scholarship, that's because the U.S. said, you are going to be a spy. And you are going to report back to us what these people do. That's what missionaries did, right? They're not saving souls. They said, you are going to be a spy. Which people don't like these other people, right? Which people like the others, but who can have a wedge driven between them, between the saved and the heathens, right? So again, we have to look critically at all of these things. Why are we doing it? When are we doing it? For whose ultimate benefit? Right? So again, when we're thinking about our scholarship, this should be at the forefront. There's a need, again, to go towards further developments in African philosophy, engaging in the problems of contemporary Africa, right? So if we have this philosophy, like this morning, if we have all these African combat sciences, how come every military in the world is using it, but we're not using ours, right? We say, oh, we want to train the youth for discipline and teach them character and blah, blah, blah. Send them to karate class. Oh, look at those guys on the beach, they're boxing each other. Oh, that's so terrible. Send them to karate class so they can have some discipline.
You left out about 3.
About 3. I actually have a video of that, and I'll add that in. Do you know how to do it?
You just fight on the beach.
You can do it,
No,
Okay.
I don't fight. I fight with my mom. No, move. What you do? That's so good. But what is also part.
Yes. Actually, in around 2006, 2007, there's a World African Martial Arts Conference, WAMA. Of course, we don't like the term martial, but that's what they use. And they came to Accra to study Abu Tree with the Ga masters. And it looked extremely effective. So you see them doing the boxing, but they have other sides to it too that goes into wrestling, breaks, all these different types of things. Exactly. So again, we have these resources. Why can't we use these resources? So this morning's presentation wasn't exhaustive. I would definitely add that. But again, it's to drive a point home that if we have them, why can't we use them? Or if we have them, what's the point of just taking it and giving it to non-Africans? for them to give value added, bring it back to you. Now you say, well, look at this wonderful thing that they brought back. Kamalu was also very critical of Okokbitek, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who does not believe that Africans have any metaphysics and accuses certain African scholars of smuggling Greek metaphysics into African belief systems, right? However, he forgets that the Greeks studied in Egypt, or Kemet as we know it to be, and learned much of their metaphysics from the Egyptians, who are fundamentally, culturally, and genetically an African people. For those who aren't aware about all these different aspects, there's a talk called Why Kemet Matters that I gave last year that goes into, even recently as 2012, 2013, they did genetic studies of the so-called mummies of the Amarna Nesu pharaohs and showed that their closest genetic relations are found in the Great Lakes region of Africa, around Uganda, that area, Southern Africa, West Africa, then going into Horn of Africa, Sahel, so forth and so on. So if they're not African, neither are you. If you're not African, neither are they. So if Witek had studied the accounts of creation of the Dogon, Bambara, or ancient Egyptians, Africans of Kemet, he would have realized that the idea of God as an architect and a preconceived form of the universe, although not found in many African cultures, is certainly present. Also, given that Plato, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, I hope you are, studied in Egypt under Egyptian priests, it is likely that the so-called Platonic ideas are really African ones, right? That was the a lecture by Theophile of Menga I sent to you early on in the course. Did anyone get a chance to look at that? You all looking at each other? Perhaps I should send the link to you again. It was after the very first class on Bibi Tumikasa. It was there. So he talks about all of this Greek. When you read the actual Greek itself, they point you to exactly where they got their information from. So the stolen legacy wasn't so much at that time as it is in the 1700s, mainly 1800s, where now Europeans need to justify all their atrocities against African people. So it's not so bad to do it if they're not really humans or they never contributed anything.
But they themselves confirm that.
That's my point.
If you read Manly People's books, he confirms it.
This is the whole point, that the Greeks themselves said, I paid 6 drachma to go to Kemet, I learned this, they taught me this. We're saying that the stolen legacy is more of a recent phenomenon, not so much at that point in time. At that point in time, they were very clear. But when Europeans are trying to justify enslavement and colonization, that's when they're saying, look, the Greeks started it. Well, read the Greeks. What did the Greeks say? Asakon. Wonderful. So, again, he implicitly but falsely assumes that since African accounts, as he correctly notes, generally speak of creation of the universe out of such as noon, and therefore follows that an African creator cannot Okay, so this is exactly what we're dealing with. So, he says, what may be a superstition is paraded as African religion, and the white world is expected to endorse that it is indeed a religion, but an Africa religion. What in all cases is a mythology is paraded as African philosophy, what in all cases a dictatorship is paraded as African democracy, and the white culture is again expected to endorse that it is so. So Oruka himself is engaged with African writers concerned with the white world and identifies further categories of indigenous African writers. One of these groups, he says, is convinced that there should be some great things in African culture as in white culture. Think about how psychotic this notion is, right? Not saying of his own fault, of course he was made this way for someone's interest. They are then busy looking for such great cultural elements because nothing exists outside of what Europeans did or plagiarized. But they do not identify with nor live according to the culture which they are trying to eulogize. Their inspiration and temperament are still European, although by conviction they want to do something for Africa. They want to make African culture sound as great as the white cultures, hence they exaggerate and look for exotic aspects of African culture. This is why we need African studies, because if we don't have African studies, you'll have people like this, right? So this is the perfect result of, how would I call this? Brainwashing isn't the right term because it's dirty.
Imperialistic dictatorship.
Yeah, that can work. Or hegemony of epistemology, any of those things. So in critique of Oruka, Kamalu says he implicitly accepts the notion of a great white culture, where is it, that has no equal in the world and an inferior African culture. But he falls into the same trap as Appiah in disregarding the importance of the African past as bearing on the present and being a guide as to how Africans should shape their future. So he says, yet the truth is that however great the past might have been, it makes little difference to the type of society that Africans must now work to bring about. The situation we are now in demands that the great concern should be for the future rather than for the past. So this is what people tell Africans, but then you will look at British citizens who have nothing to do with Greece at all, reading Greek literature and performing plays, right? So you come to us and say, don't look at the past, just move forward. Presumably with a very European mindset like he has. All I know is Greece, so let's use that to build with. Perhaps, right? There's room for diversity. Perhaps that's the right way to go. You do that, go. Meanwhile, back in Africa, I will do something slightly different. And then we'll see how it all shakes out in the end, right? Now, Kamalu also talks about Sankofa. He says, whilst criticizing others for being European in outlook, Oruka adopts a conception of time whereby the past is isolated and dissociated from the present and future instead of being seen as inseparably connected. So we talked about this idea of timeline, of time going like this, right? So in critiquing everyone else, right, you're pointing here and look at all the fingers you have pointing back at you, right? Beposo ejuma, obi nshi obi to. Beposo ejuma. Same thing. So when you're all working on the mountain, don't look at someone else's buttocks because your own buttocks are exposed. Right? So anyway, Oruka adopts a conception of time whereby the past is isolated and dissociated from the present and future instead of being seen as inseparably connected. In Oruka's mind, it is a question of concern for the future or the past, thereby seeing them as separate, distinct, disconnected, and mutually independent. So it's either this or that. Which type of opposites is that? Diametric. Which again, there's nothing intrinsically bad about diametric, but for whose ultimate benefit, right? Who told you that you have to see the world in that way? And this is just like this morning we're talking about this idea of binary, right? So we do the Ifa casting, that's binary, but then we also have concepts of complementary, right? So now, instead of trying to combat binary thinking with more binary thinking, oh, we shouldn't do binary because that's binary, and binary is bad, and something else is good, right? Aren't we caught in the same trap? right? Using binary thinking to combat binary thinking, as opposed to trying to look at it in terms of ma'at, propriety. When is it appropriate to use binary? Just like when we're doing the Ifa casting. And when is it appropriate to look at things as complementary, such as Geb and Nut, right? We have both in the African worldview. It's just a question of how are we arranging things, how are we categorizing them. Bibia wa nimre, energy wa nimre, arabo wa nimre, right? Bibia wa nimre. Everything has its time. Bobo koloni asikotire. Proverb in Yoruba, everything has its appropriate time, right? This is ma'at. What is that but ma'at? Asemba nebube, asemaya nebube. What is that up there ma'at? Right? So he talks about in the Sankofa bird symbol, the bird reaches backwards to prune its feathered tail in reference to the need to look to the past for lessons of value in dealing with present realities. At the same time, the bird's body is face forward, right? So I'm here, but I'm turning to the back, right? I wonder if this has combat significance for Aguera. Perhaps we should try that one out. Asakon
Okosa.
Asakon
Okosa.
Good.
Yeah, you know that. So you're talking about if he has any parallels with combat. But what comes to mind is having eyes at the back of your head, so you know what's behind you without necessarily seeing it physically.
And we saw that this morning when we were looking at the Damba specifically. Now, some colleagues have said, all right, Damba doesn't have anything to do with war. But for me as a practitioner, I will see something different than perhaps someone who does something different. So if they're doing this, and they're already ready to engage this other person, they're already ready to engage the person who was there, there's something going on with that, right? That you're training a skill. And even as a practitioner, when I'm playing an instrument, right? This one can be on autopilot and I'm freestyling with my voice, right? Or I can freestyle with the instrument and now be on autopilot with the voice and go back and forth. That's actually training a skill that's very useful in combat. So you can say, oh, you're just playing an instrument, it's disconnected. But once you understand that everything is one thing, you realize that the Creator is one with many arms, right? This is just a different manifestation of what I want to do when I'm combating someone. So Oruka then proceeds to distinguish mythology. You can tell that Kamalo doesn't like Oruka very much.
Yeah.
And I think Oruka himself may not be all that likable. Oruka then proceeds to distinguish mythology from philosophy, arguing that mythology is removed from scientific and philosophical thought. But he does not demonstrate this by reference to any actual examples from African mythology. He makes this assertion in the area of morals and says, whatever the nature of such a moral system, it is morality but not ethics or moral philosophy. Again, he's trying to define the problem away. That as long as I can define it in this dichotomous box of European stuff, that's it. Everything else is outside of it. So what is he doing but the work of the Eurasian for the Eurasian? Because he has been infected with what we call the Urugu virus, right? So once you catch that fever, they don't even have to be around, right? The mosquito can leave you alone. But now you have the malaria. It doesn't even need to do anything else again. Again, he says there's morality but not ethics or moral philosophy. I conceive ethics as reason applied to morality, and morality as a total of customs, habits, and conventions that guide a people's conduct. So again, he'll come up with whatever definition is necessary to take the European out and lift the European up, right? Again, this is why I want you to be critical about African thought. Not every single thing you see a continental African do is African thought. You need to be able to distinguish between African thought, anti-African thought, right? Who originated it? Who benefits from it? Asakon Okosa, right? Anything that comes in front of your path, you should be constantly thinking, where did this come from? Who originated it? Who benefits from it? However, Okwewo points out actual mythological examples, and he sees reason and speculation as essential elements or ingredients of philosophy. So he says, narrative examples, the Essay 5, of Yoruba. Meanwhile, the speculative ingredient is satisfied, according to Okwewo, by the dilemma tales which generate reasoned discussion of questions of morality and other areas. So if you ever get a chance to read the essay file, which I would highly recommend, you will find that whenever you go for a divination, and remember the portion of the course on divination, that the Babalawo is not to know what your problem is. This comes out, now I chant things out, and then from your own ahonim, from your own self-knowledge, you have to apply it to yourself, right? So if this comes out and it says, oh, when this happened, such and such happened, this person killed someone and was caught. If you're a murderer, you will get something very different from someone who didn't do any murder. For that one, it's just, oh yes, let me think about it. Okay, maybe this means that I should be well, I should treat people nicely. But someone who's committed murder will say, oh, how did you know? I gotta get this Babalawo, he knows, right? So whatever you get from it is what you get from it. Now in these stories, they're very interesting because they are self-sustaining, that it talks about how this person had this problem and was told to make a sacrifice. In cases where the person makes a sacrifice, it talks about how that person went on to do well, right? Or you Babalawo, no, you fa. So this person went to praise the Babalawo praised Ifa, everything went well. Right? However, it also gives other examples where this person did not do the sacrifice, and invariably the person who does not do the sacrifice ends up floating face down in the river, ends up, with a head chopped off. Something goes wrong in this person's life, right? So you get this idea of basically a narrative to tell you the potential things that happen. So you can choose either this path, you can choose that path, whichever one you like. You say, I'm not going to make the sacrifice. Okay, fine. Right? Okay, I'll make a different sacrifice, or I'll make the sacrifice prescribed. So here also it talks about Eurasians. Sir James Fraser. Now we talked about Eurasians, right? Is Europe a continent, anyone? No. Not in this class, at least.
Yes.
When you go to some European geography class or whatever class, you say yes. But when you're here, this is my contextuality, right? You say no, it's not a continent. Why? Because it's actually not a continent. You will look at Eurasia, you see that Europe is just on the butt crack of Eurasia. How can that be a continent? If that's a continent, then this room is a continent. Because that makes me feel better about myself. Right? Hacho, the continent of Hacho. So anyway, coming back. So Eurasians such as Sir James Fraser and the Golden Bough had to admit to a primitive philosophy and myth. Later authors like Levi Grohl, Robin Horton, Jack Goody see the need to deny even a primitive rationality in the interest of maintaining the idea that philosophy is a European invention. Right? Whatever degree of philosophy they have, it is due to them being somewhat still human, despite having mixed with Neanderthal. Unless it is independently European, perhaps that is something they got from Neanderthals. But again, that's very highly doubtful. So Theophil Obinna challenges the idea that philosophy was an indigenous invention of the Greeks. And he does this through linguistics. He begins by reminding us that the Greek word philosophia is popularly believed to have come from the Greek word sophos, often taken to mean wisdom.
Sophos.
Yes. Have you heard of that before on campus? Now there may be some correlation, naming things after Greek things and things not working properly. Perhaps if you named it after the original African thing, things would work well. Just the other day, my car wouldn't start. Let me give you this thing. And my father always does it. My car wouldn't start. Someone who is very close to me left the air conditioning on, left the turn signal on, just turned off the key and walked away. Right? So it's draining the battery. We come out, it's time to go, no sound. That's a problem. So one of our colleagues here in the institute saw me outside, I'm trying to The problem was I couldn't get the terminal off either. So, okay, what are we going to do? He brought the battery. All right, that doesn't work. Tried to use the spanner to do it. That doesn't work. So, do you have cables? Yes, I have cables. Now, the red cable, it had broken off. So, you have the wire here, the wire there. We had to try to get the wire to come back together. Then apply that to positive here, positive there, black to negative there, black negative there. All right? I hope you know where we're going with this. It wouldn't start, wouldn't start, wouldn't start. Let's do it the other way. Let's put the black on positive, and that is the whole wire, right? No break, no nothing. Let's put the black positive to positive. Let's put red negative to negative. Started out right away. I say that is that the black is positive. This is what my father always does. He always puts black on the positive to positive terminal. Always puts red on negative to negative. So black is positive. I have another colleague in Atlanta where he teaches chess. He has a book called Chess Primer. And he always has black start first. Now, for those of you who know European chess, and Europeans, when they play chess, the white moves first and the black is always on defense. Right? He says, whose silly rule is that? And why do we have to follow it? Pieces there, black is on offense. Europeans are on defense. And this is something that is very useful for his psychology, right? I hope you can appreciate some of these things. Anyway, we're coming back. So, often taken to mean wisdom, but Obinga's linguistic analysis shows that the origin of this word is not Greek, but borrowed from the Egyptian seba, which means instructed. This is not surprising when it is understood that the Egyptians had taught Greek philosophers in their what? Mystery school. The Greeks themselves attest to many of their philosophers, Pythagoras, Plato, Democritus, Thales, supposedly the first Greek philosopher, studying in Egypt and claim that the Egyptians revealed the art of philosophy to them. Right? Now when Europeans see this, what happens? They say, no. When anti-Africans see this, what happens? No. So you want to bring up the Greeks are saying, no, don't lift us up. Let's lift up the ones who actually originated it. So what do Europeans do but say, oh, the Greeks didn't know what they were talking about. They were just trying to see what had happened was. If anyone starts off with what had happened was, it means that whatever was coming after is a lie. See, what had happened was, that means I need some time to think of what I'm going to say next, right? So anytime any European pseudo-scholar wants to do this, you have my permission to warm up. Wear a slap and slap hot fire out of them. Only the hot fire, not the cold type. Asakon Okusa. Asakon Okusa. Asakon Okusa. And because this is recording, I will just say that I'm not encouraging violence on camera. For anyone, that's just.
Okay, we understand.
Wonderful. That's my disclaimer. For the soul's day, the Egyptian priests revealed the practice of philosophy, which can at the same time, that should be which can at the same time set some rules and look for the nature of things. So the Greeks, again, Thales, Pythagoras, Plato, were taught, instructed, and educated by Egyptian priests, the Egyptian Seba. Instructed became Sophos in Greek, with the derivative Sophia, the compound Sophon, hence Philosophia. So next time you go to the philosophy department, ask them, what is the Sophos part? Or next time you go to computing, say, why are we working with Sophos? Why can't we work with Seba? But this is why we need African studies, because how many even know what Seba is? Right? Do they know how to write it? Do they get it in creche? Do they get it in primary, junior, senior, university? If not, how are we going to expect them to know anything about these types of things? So Bega's work challenges the long tradition of Western scholarship, or some may call it Western pseudo-scholarship, denying philosophy to both ancient and traditional African societies. Such a notion is shocking to those who have been arguing that philosophy is a Western invention, that not even your word for philosophy is a Western invention, much less any of the content. Now, again, this is something that is very, as he says, it's something that's shocking to them, right? So what would they try to do other than kick back against that? But when you read the dictionary, you can find exactly what we're talking about. Seba, pupil, Seba, teaching, Sebait. We're talking about the instructions of Patahotep, the instructions of Harjadep Kagimni. This is the word that's used, Sebait, the written teachings and instructions, right? Seba, door. And these are related concepts, just like how we talked about this morning. Asa and Asa are related. Nsiu is related to Asiu, is related to Osiu, related to Asiu, right? It's letting you know these are related. So Seba, also the door. Seba, teaching instructions. Seba, surveying instrument. Seba, teaching. And then Seba, dwell, morning star. That the root of it that you see in all this is Seba, the star. Right? So again, next time you go to the philosophy department, drop something on them. Bring them a dictionary of Middle Egyptian and say, look, this is your work. So doesn't this all belie the fact that philosophy, as Appiah says, is a label which conveys status on a civilization, not just an attribute of Western culture? So that's the whole point of this battle for the world of philosophy. And we can even debate, to what degree we need to be fighting over words in English or Greek or anything else, right? Let's start a fight over African words, Seba. And this is one of the things that the discipline or undiscipline of Egyptology is all there to tell you that the Africans were not African. You're looking at the face of these Africans, and they're there to tell you this African face you're looking at is not an African face. That's the whole point of the thing, right? Now, if they actually believe that these are Europeans or that they're not Africans, all you would hear about is Kemet, right? They know the Greeks are Europeans, that's why we hear about them. Now, as a sidebar, they say, oh, but the Egyptians, either they weren't Africans or even if they were, they didn't do anything significant. If you didn't have the genetic evidence, the linguistic evidence, the written evidence, all types of evidence, and again, I encourage you to look at the Why Kemet Matters talk if you haven't seen it. If we didn't have all that evidence, and all we had was what Europeans do, the very fact that they are trying to let you know, oh, Kemet didn't invent philosophy, that lets you know who the African is. Hope you're following along with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because if they were white, that's all you would hear. From sun up to sunset. From morning to night. From the beginning of the week to the end of the week. I hope you're following along. Very good. So in their very trying to suppress Kemet, they have told you exactly who the Africans of Kemet are. And even that's why they don't want to use the term Kemet, because it means land of black people. And the word Kemet themselves is saying black people. So, but why must philosophy have only one mode of cultural expression? Is philosophy defined by the kinds of truth it seeks, the sorts of questions it asks, or is it defined by the way in which we ask these questions and pursue their answers? Right? So these are questions that Kamalu is bringing forth. Let's come back one more time. Asakon, Asakon, Asakon. Wonderful. That's reciprocity. The way I say it is how you give it back. Right? So the question, but why must philosophy have only one mode of cultural expression? Or Europeans say this is how we do it, therefore how we do it is universal now. Is philosophy defined by the kinds of truths it seeks, the sorts of questions it asks, or is it defined by the way we ask these questions and pursue their answers? Good questions. So in choosing to refer to the African world system of beliefs as the African worldview, we are not denying it the status of philosophy, which is here regarded as a basic human rational activity. It is to acknowledge that the African worldview encompasses more than philosophy, but also science, art, and religion. And if we can, I want to see if we can pull up the Obenga. But the beginning, the end of all of this is, to what degree do we want to try to convince Eurasians that we have African philosophy? Right? To a certain degree, this is a diversion from what our actual work is. Right? So anytime we're saying, okay, I'm going over here, they throw a bone and then we go running after it. Oh yes, we do have it. Okay, good. Then they throw another one. Oh yes, yes, we do have it. At what point in time do we ever reach our destination? When we keep answering these things. So I will give you a quote from Toni Morrison, where she says to be always answering questions and mounting defenses about things you thought were obvious keeps you from doing your work. Let's run that back one more time. Say it with me. To be always answering.
Always answering questions.
Oh.
Hey, we didn't reach that.
Hey, relax. Please. To be always answering.
To be always answering
questions. And mounting defenses. About things you thought were obvious. Keeps you from doing your work. What does that mean?
Things that have been already answered, you need no answers.
It has been answered. Say again.
Things that have already been answered, you need no answers. Or
Like-
further answers.
Go ahead.
Why do you have to try and convince somebody that really Africans were able to think and make their own wise decisions? So I already know Africans already have these ideas. And I would rather tell an African person who has been educated into thinking that my ancestors didn't have anything to work by, than going to tell somebody who made those same arguments that you have nothing to work with. So it doesn't make any difference. If I know red is red, why should I come and tell somebody else that is red? So
Right. And another point with all of this is the ones who are saying that you don't have it, they already know that you do.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of why they're going out of their way to say you don't have it. So now, and again, you could say that to some degree, maybe that's the role for certain people. So like when that came up in the PhD talk the other week, I was saying, well, perhaps that's the role for certain people, right? Y'all be on the battlefront. And to the same degree that that's a diversion for African people, that's also a diversion from Eurasians, right? So let them be engaged in this battle back and forth. They're wasting our time, but look, we got people who are wasting their time too. You all do what you're going to do, but then let's use those resources and do whatever we actually need to do for ourselves, right? So for me, there's only so much I will say to an African who wants to be debating Europeans and trying to convince them that what they already know isn't the case, right? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that most often things they are trivial and then they engage us in things that, instead of doing other things which will benefit our continent, we just try to answer their question, which most often goes to enrich them and make them more powerful.
Very good. And this is the very point that we're getting at, that to a certain degree when we look at scholarship, right, in this context that we are in now, to a large degree it is not to serve our interests. And when my former PhD supervisor, he gave his inaugural lecture. I'm not sure if any of you have seen that, but I mentioned it. What was it? Cocoa, cassava, and chocolate. Right? If you haven't seen it, I'll just briefly let you know what it's about. But in the talk, he's saying that we can look at our scholarship as analogous to our food situation. That we can clear acres and acres and acres to plant cocoa to export to someone else, or we can use those same things those same acres to plant cassava, which sustains ourselves, right? So we use it for cocoa, we send it out, they bring it back as chocolate, and we have to buy it back at a higher rate, right? Hope you're following along.
Yeah.
Whereas if we are meeting our own needs, we can say that maybe in the 50s and the 60s that, we can understand why people are using so much of their time, devoting so much of their time to that. But we can say in this day and age, would that be the best use of our resources, of our time, our intelligence, of our money, of our energy, right? T-I-M-E, time, intelligence, money, energy. All of these are the resources that we have. We only have so much of them. So the time that you are spending trying to argue with Europeans who already know that what they're saying is ridiculous, right? You could be doing that, just as you said, to educate someone who has been a victim of Eurasian miseducation. Any other thoughts on this? Or on validity of African philosophy in general?
Isn't arguing with someone who, what was the last thing you said that you should spend more time trying to change the mind of someone who has been miseducated? Yeah, an African person. Isn't that also a lot of wasted time?
I would say so. I would say between trying to convince a European and trying to convince a neo-colonialized African, and those are the two options, then I would say trying to convince a neo-colonialized African would be more useful. But for me personally, I wouldn't see that in general as the best use of time either, right? I would say implementing different solutions based on this knowledge would be the highest degree. But then at the same time, you see me here at University of Ghana, people haven't heard some of these different concepts, so I'm actually doing what I'm saying may not be the best use of energy, but at the same time, I say that this is better than, I could be at University of Wisconsin talking to an all-white class, and they're saying Africans were eating bananas swinging from trees, and I could spend the next 10 years trying to convince these Eurasians that that's not the case, right? Or I could be in Africa, doing a class like this, saying, look, this is our creation stories. This is our concept of ethics and morality. This is this, this is that. Because for one of you, it may be fertile ground. Will you take it beyond anything I can even conceive of? I hope you understand. So, again, I think that we could even get into a diametric opposite thing with that, right? Is this good use of time? Is it not good use of time or whatever? Or we could see it as a continuum. And either view is legit. I could choose to look at it like this. I could choose to look at it like that. But I could look at it as a continuum. That this, I could see, is generally not a good use of time. This may be slightly better. This may be slightly better than that. This may be slightly better. Better only in the sense of getting you towards the objective that you say that you're aiming towards. Right? Other thoughts?
But the question we could ask is, why do they do that?
Very good.
And then, is there a need for us to respond? Because if you look at the 1960s to the 70s, the question posed by the Western world was that Africa had no history.
Yeah.
And so because of that, there was no need establishing department of history. And then department of history were needed to be established, and then it became their quest to answer that question. They spent the entire, almost decade and beyond answering those questions.
Yeah.
Then they began to switch the meter band by, in the same 50s, trying to institute African studies. And then African studies was opposing history. And the historians and the Africanists were not in agreement. They were at each other's throat. I remember working for Professor Gordon then, what's his name, Nkrumah Church, as his assistant. And when you go to the archive that has been established now, you see a huge debate, some didn't even see the usefulness of African studies. Buzia, for example, said that not see any reason why they should establish African studies. In that when you go to Europe, they don't have European studies. Meanwhile, the Carnegie Foundation purposely sent him to the US to go and understudy their institutions and come to implement it. But when he returned in 1948, he said he was not going to do that because he didn't see the need. So, and then they all jumped into that argument, trying to establish, the conundrum of African study and then vis-a-vis African philosophy, whether it existed or not.
So this is, you brought up two very good points. So one is this idea of why we have in African studies when in Europe they don't have European studies, except
The study of the world is European studies.
everything they study is European studies. If you go to a university, or if you go to any level of school in Europe, what you will learn about the same things that you learned about here. You will learn about your Napoleon. You will learn about your, who else? Name some random white folks who you learn about. Cecil Rhodes, good, who else?
That's Columbus.
You learn about Kansas, you learn about
Legendary white folks. So, what we have so far is European studies, right? What we're trying to do is carve out a place where there can be African studies, because even when inside of African studies, what sometimes may be passed off as African studies may actually be anti-African studies, right? So when we're talking about when you go to Europe, they don't have European studies. Oh yes, they do. It's just, do you have eyes to see it and ears to hear it? Because that is exactly what they are going to be studying. When they say, oh, nothing existed in the Americas until Europeans got there, or philosophy didn't start until the Greeks started doing it, right? It would be like, please, please raise your hand. Now that I invented hand raising,
European.
all right, I invented it.
Yes.
Your hand is up first, but I invented it because now my hand. This is what you have.
You didn't tell me that it was about inventing hand raising. So since mine was up first, then I did it.
But I'm European, so the point at which I start raising my hand is the point in time that it came into being.
Okay. Yeah.
This, as ridiculous as what I'm saying sounds, this is what we're living with right now. People were living in the Americas, but Columbus discovered America so far. Right? You're looking at the map and you're looking and saying, Europe is not a continent. They tell you Europe is a continent and then you start nodding your head. Europe is a continent. Yes. Zombie, that's what a fella used to talk about. Zombie, oh zombie. Right?
Well, what do you think of things like the Nobel Peace Prize?
The Nobel Peace Prize. I'll give you a quote or a paraphrase rather from Malcolm X, that when Martin Luther King won the Nobel Peace Prize, he said something to the effect of, you have to be wary about those who, when the war is not yet over, you're getting awards from the enemy. Right? And, all of this comes to the idea of validation from your past, current, and future enemies. So in my own life, when I was graduating college, well, all throughout college, what college is the same as university, not like the government college, right? When I was graduating from Morehouse College, all throughout my college career, I never joined any of these Greek letter societies. How psychotic would it be for me as an African to pledge into a Greek society and say that I am a black Greek? Before I do that, please bring a shotgun for me to blow my head off.
Before we do that.
Before you can even warm up a nice hot capoeira slap for me, so perhaps wake me out of my senses before I do anything rash. So all throughout college, I never did anything like that because I know I'm African. It would be like I don't know what this would be like. Let's picture a baby who, when the baby sits on your lap, the baby defecates and urinates. Now you are the parent. You're supposed to know better. You say, in revenge, you sit on the baby's lap and you defecate and urinate. Some lesson, but perhaps not a well-adjusted job growing. So basically you have an adult acting like a baby. The adults being Africans, and we're saying that we are black Greeks. This is the equivalent. What the Greeks produce is equivalent to defecation and urination, right? But now they brought it to us and called it philosophy and whatever else. Now us, the adults, we're saying, look at what the Greeks have done. Ours is just as good. Let's go and produce some ourselves. What's a harsh lesson for the baby? So anyway, that's to come back to the actual question of the Nobel Prize and to relate it back. So I never did any of the Greek stuff. Now, when we graduate, they have an honor society. What do they call the honor society? They call it Phi Beta Kappa. And they say, oh, we've extended this invitation to you as this honor for you to be in Phi Beta Kappa. What do you think I did? If I had no principles, I would join. If I would rather have a bullet through my head than to call myself a black Greek, I would not join. And no, I did not join. I declined it. Right? So again, this comes back to all these same ideas. Do you want validation from your enemy? If they give you a Nobel Prize, do you say, I want that prize? Do you even accept it or do you reject it? That these are, it's like the crossroads of the issue. At any of these points, you decide what you are about. And then you are the one who has to live with what you're about. So if you feel like it's a contradiction, then you live with the contradiction until all of these different multiple cells start going in different directions, right? Oh, I said I'm African, but look at me going and getting pats on the head by some Eurasian, right?
What if someone took that prize because that was the only way she knew that, say, the leaders in the country who are very anti-African will actually listen to her and implement what she knows is really
yeah. So context, right? So you can say in that context, maybe she should do that, right? And again, this is the idea of expediency over propriety. That those two are not the same, right? And if you look throughout the course of African history, especially you look at the works of Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization, to some degree he traces what caused the destruction of black civilization is the prioritization of what is expedient over what is right, right? So it is definitely expedient and you can get your things done to do it in that way. And again, part of my idea is talking about context, propriety, right? So you can say, if that's the only way to do it, more power to you, sister, go ahead, you do that, right? If, on the other hand, you say, and that's only if you think that that's not right for you to do, right? If you say, this is my principle, it's not right for us to do that, then you say, all right, I'm going to stand on that principle and reject that. But, you know, this is why wisdom is very useful, because having the wisdom to know whether you should do this and compromise, quote unquote, but perhaps you is not a compromise, perhaps you're running full speed, hey, give it to me, right? For some, it may be a compromise, so do you compromise on your principle if you had that in the first place? Or do you say, this is what I'm about, I'm not going to do it? And for each one of us, we have to make those decisions every single day. And for some of us, some people do it better than others, some people do it worse than others. Some people, because of their compromises, they're billionaires, right? But they may not be able to sleep at night. I know very recently, like, this guy was an actor, a millionaire, he killed himself, right? So, you know, through your expedience, you may get to your goals. There's a proverb that says, you may arrive at your destination but be unable to return. So you may do anything, all means to get to where you want to go, but at a certain point you get there, you may realize I would give all this up to be able to just be the type of human that I would like to be the person that I say that I am. But again, just everyone has to answer that for themselves. Where do I compromise? Where do I stand firm? And some of this even goes back to what we were talking about this morning with the capoeira, right? You come in here, do you dodge? When do you stand? When do you move? When do you hit? Right? These are decisions every single day, and that's what I like about the combat sciences, because all of those things are made very real and immediate right in front of you right now. You see this, you have to decide, am I going to go down, or am I going to stand and take the kick? You make your choices.
But the question also is, who was Alfred Nobel? Why was that instituted in his name?
This is the point. So when Europeans do anything, they have ideas of how they're going to benefit from it, right? And this is what we have to be very cognizant of. So at the same token, we can say, okay, I know Europeans are going to benefit from this, but at the same time, I think I can squeeze in my own benefits and then, pull away from there. You can find in all these times of colonization, Europeans were making treaties with various African people who are doing exactly what we're saying right there, right? So Europeans are saying, okay, I'm going to these particular fancies from Hogwa, and then these other ones from Anamansa, then these other ones are aligned with the Danes, these ones are aligned with the Dutch, these are aligned with whoever, Portuguese, British. Everyone is making their own side deals because you think that your interests coincide with the interests of your past, current, and future enemies. Now, history can tell us what happened with that, right? We thought we had the same interests as those particular Europeans, but now the Dutch are off the coast, and now you have to go and beg the British for whatever, right? You thought that you had common interests, but then came the Berlin Conference. And what Europeans said is whatever problems we have amongst ourselves as Europeans, those problems will never supersede the problems we have with all you Africans. You think you're from Owa, you think you're from Anamansa, you think you're from Mankesim, you think you're Simba, whatever you call yourself. But at the end of the day, all of you are one thing to me. So if at the time where they're saying we're all one thing and are using that in their oppression, then it makes sense to say, look, we're all different. But now we're saying, look, we can see that oneness as a base of power to fight against them. Now when we say, look, we're one thing, now Europeans say, no, look, you're so diverse. Right? So anything that they do, you have to think about how do they plan on benefiting from it. And again, to come back to the combat sciences, that this is why it's very useful, for me when I see someone make a move, right? I don't wait to see is it going to be a punch or a kick or a headbutt. I say whatever it is, I'm out. I'm not so curious to say, oh, how is it going to come? Is it going to hurt when it comes? No. I don't need any of that information. We've already understood the type of situation that we're going to have. So any move that you make, I understand what that move, what the intent is. And this came up last week with the presentation by Chidi, right? Those people were like, oh, y'all giving us mosquito nets? I said, those folks are smarter than a lot of the folks sitting in the room. I'm like, those folks know more history than some of our historians. Whether or not there's anything on a mosquito net, I'm like, there's more intelligence in there than saying, I don't think there is. Right? So, again, anything that a European does, you have to think about how do they plan on benefiting from it. And anything that crosses your path, if you're intelligent, you would say, who originates this thing? How do they plan on benefiting from it? To whatever degree you find your interests merging with the interests of your enemy, you need to check yourself and take a long, hard thought about that. Why do I think that the thing that my enemy wants is also what I want? And again, this comes back to Amos Wilson's talk where he talks about created tastes and desires, right? So you think, oh, I just want these shoes. I was looking at an article yesterday. I don't know how I got to that part of the internet, but it was talking about Oprah Winfrey went into some store in Switzerland to buy a crocodile purse that was something like 20,000 euros or whatever it was. And the sales girl said, "Oh, you don't want that one, you can't afford that." Oprah, who has $3 billion and could buy that little white girl 1,000 times over, and her mama, she's telling Oprah Winfrey, "Oh, you don't want that, you can't afford that," right? And Oprah said that she decided, she was thinking that she would act like something, one of these movies where somebody,
Pretty woman.
that's it. She was gonna act like Pretty Woman and go back and say, "Buy, give me everything. I'm buying the store. You're fired. What's her salary for the next 2 years? All right, I'll give you that. Fire her now." Right? She said that she would have done that, but then she was saying that they would have got, the girl would have gotten a commission off of that and didn't want to do that. But at no point did I hear her questioning, why do I want that in the first place? Who created the taste and the desire for that? Because that could have been a wake-up moment for Oprah to say, why am I questing after these things that are enriching people who are treating me in such a way? Right? But I don't think Oprah got the same type of political education that we're getting right now at the University of Ghana. So she probably got the bag somewhere else.
You probably got a hookup on
It was a crocodile bag. She probably got a crocodile.
Yeah.
Just wrap it up for me. Give me a live one. Sorry, I'll carry that one. I got the money. So, you know, all these things are things to think about. And again, for us, in our everyday life, we have to ask ourselves, are we going to be principled? Are we going to stand on decisions? Or do we compromise to get to where we want to go? Right? But this is the thing about African thought, that it's not as quote-unquote simple, rudimentary, primitive, if you like, as European thought. Because European thought is trying to tell you, always do this, never do that. That's the Bible, right? Even though that's contradictory in and of itself. But this is the revelation, that's it. Always do this, never do that. As opposed to this more nuanced thing of wisdom is important. So when do we do this and when do we not? When do we look at things in terms of binary? When do we look at things in terms of complementary, continuum, right? Both. And this is one thing that even came up to some degree this morning and in one of the PhD discussions, where it came up about the idea of hypothesis, right? There's, in European intellectual traditions, they go from one thing to another. So one thing is positivism, you know, you have to experiment and test and blah, blah, blah. Then after that, you go into this, to that. Structuralism, formalism, functionalism, they have all their things one after the other. When this one falls out of vogue, then you go to the next thing. That's this, basically unilinear evolution, you keep going, whatever. And for us, our job, apparently, as African scholars, is to just keep pace with that, right? And this can get us caught in something like what we could say is negritude scholarship. Asakon, okusa, asakon, okusa. What do I mean when I say negritude scholarship? One of the interesting statements that came out of the negritude movement was the idea that reason is Greek, emotion is Negro or black, right? So let's bequeath to the Greeks what is theirs, and then let's, you know, really be as emotional as we can possibly be to really be African, right? Now, when we look at something like quote-unquote positivism or hypotheses or testing things, to take that type of view is assuming African people didn't test anything, right? And we're just kind of like, let's kind of go with the flow and feel it out, you know. Is this poisonous? Let's try it. Oh, that's a test. We don't do tests, you know. That's Greek. Let's take another one. Right? What we're doing by default is assuming that things that we've been doing and have documented as doing, that's a European type of modality. So to truly be African, we need to just kind of have research questions and, you know, whatever comes out, whatever, even if we have a hypothesis, let's just put that under wraps and don't say I actually think that this is what's going to happen, let's just whatever. I hope you understand how that's problematic. Because in attempting to combat the form of European thing, what you think is European, the positivism, hypotheses, testing, that's European stuff, you're actually being European and trying to combat the European thing that you're talking about by assuming this is our diametric opposites, that's this, ours is that, so let's just stay in our lane. That's what I would call negritude scholarship. What we talked about this morning is confronting or trying to debate binary with more binary. Debating diametric opposites with more diametric opposites. If you really don't believe that diametric opposites is the way to go, then you need to be using something complementary. But if you say diametric opposites is bad, complementary is good, what are you doing other than diametric opposites? Now, on the African side, or as African people have tended to do it over the past few thousand years, documented, what we do is more, when is this appropriate? When is this appropriate? Right? That's not to say that there isn't anything that is very fundamentally European, but even for those things, you say, all right, that's appropriate in the European context. If it's Europeans doing it, let them do it amongst themselves, right? Everything has its place and time. Its place and time is in Europe right now. Y'all go do that, right? So these are things for us to consider. I want to play a short clip, and this is Theophile Obenga.
Quickly,
Yeah, go ahead.
In Capoeira and what you talked about, what's the role of music as in us in relation to the fights, to the fighters?
Very good. So originally the music was done with 3 drums in terms of what we now know as capoeira. Rum, rumpi, and iye. So the low one, the mid one, the high one. At a certain point, and there are again different theories as to whether it was due to repression or whatever, those drums got replaced by, they got replaced by 3 berimbau, which also come from Central Africa, Southern Africa. You can find it actually all over Africa. You can find a version of it here in Ghana called Ominta. That as the music gets faster, you see the movements get faster. So as the drum changes, the dance also changes. That's the general idea. So there are certain things that when they play it, you know it's time to fight. And other times when they play it, you know it's time to just show off that you can do a little bit of acrobatics and, you know, movements, you can stretch. Now each one is telling you how you're supposed to do it. When one comes out, you know you're supposed to draw your knives and go against the other person, right? So each one has its appropriate thing. It's time. Yeah. And all of this comes to the point of reganya.
Kermit was a league. We must have known. So I will try to speak in English. Thank you, Queen Ziga, President, Dr. Ben, thank you for coming. And now you live in New York, not too far. And he's the hometown of Dr. Jeffrey. He told me that. So you are very happy to be here. He's credo too. So you have 3 credos. And after what Dr. Thompson and Dr. just said, it's very difficult to talk because almost the same. I will repeat almost the same thing. So you study what we call classical studies. We must know nature. You see, maybe in the future we need to know some heretic too. We need to know nature. And then, you see, it's connected with Asia. We must know, some of us must study some Hebrew, chiefly Arabic, and Gaze, or Giz. And then some Arabic too, because our classical studies, they're very long studies. In certain Kemet, you have Ethiopian classical period in Ethiopia with beautiful philosophers like Zara Yaakov, and you go to Sankore, Tombuktu, they study in Arabic. So it's part of the classical studies too. In the United States, in Africa, usually it's about the content of the education, more mathematics, more calculus, more computer. And we don't teach for the philosophy, which kind of education. We don't fight for philosophy of education. We fight for the content of the curriculum programs, and not for the mind frame of the education. Because in Western civilization, from kindergarten to university, from kindergarten to PhD, there is no change. It's the same philosophy. The content can change. MA, BA, MBS, until PhD, but the philosophy doesn't change. This is why they don't fight for their philosophy. It's there already. They fight for just to do more mathematics so we can compete with Asian people, Chinese people. But they don't change their philosophy. So we do the same. We follow them. We don't fight for philosophy on philosophical ground. On deep thought ground, we fight just for, we need more mathematics, more calculus, something like that. But for them, the philosophy is there. Since kindergarten to PhD is the same philosophy. First, we don't teach religion. There's no spirituality. We don't teach spirituality in kindergarten. We don't teach spirituality in PhD. There is no. It is empty of. How to say that, of religion, less of spirituality. It's empty, completely empty. Because the society wants to be a science and technology society. So we do the same, So in antiquity, President Zing asked me to talk about my recent book. It's in French. Egypt and Kemet, Greece, and School of Alexandria School. So it's always about education. So the most achievement in Kemet for is education. The way they think, they build, and they practice their education is in history. You don't succeed like that. This is why they have pyramid, they have text, they have this cosmogony. But basically, is they have teachers like Imhotep, like Tauhotep, like Kagemini, and a lot of them. He's a teacher, the best teacher in the world. You see? So education is the most achievement in Kemet, in humanity. Even Greek or Greek civilization, their education will see. Their education, it was for pigs. I can say that, but themselves they said that. So education was the key in Kemet. This is why they make this grandiose civilization. Without education, I believe there will be no Kemet. It is a question of education. We can call that many names: education, intercommunication, transmission of knowledge, but it's education. How they did that? So briefly, I will give the idea because we don't have enough time. So next, Joe just got that comment. So you know, in the book of Plato, the law, even the book 7. Next.
So primary source research.
So this book is
read what they said.
It's good for the kids, but it's not enough. We need, if you have a kids not enough, we need a trophy and idea education. Trophy, that means to nurture kids, and idea, we are pedagogy, to give them education. You need you need to nurture students and education. You see? And not that our children, both male and female, they need to be nurtured by us in the Greek schools, and they need to be educated so we can build civilization. So this nobody, we don't discuss that. It's okay for everyone. That's okay. Which kind of education then? And Plato goes on in studying Kemet education. In studying Kemet education, he says that Kemet education makes students, children, more alert and more human beings. You see? Plato said that when you go to Kemet school, you become more alert, you more work infinity wicked. You see? Note that our children in the Greek schools is okay for everyone, that's okay. Which kind of academic education? He said that.
So, look here. It says here at the top, he says that they should learn as much as the whole mob of children in Egypt. Right? Learn what they're reading lessons. You can see that here. So he's saying that this is free men must learn in each of the subjects as much as the whole mob of children in Egypt. Right? So we had a discussion, one of our professors here who was here at the time is no longer here on campus, but he was saying that, oh, the Greeks had democratic education, or they had the idea that everyone should have education. But when you read the Greeks themselves, they're saying that we should do what the Africans in Egypt are doing, because there, the whole mob of children get it. So I hope you're understanding what this is actually talking about. So we're saying we should be democratized education, but before democratists, the Greeks are saying we should be like what they're doing in Kemet, because Imhotep, the world's first multi-genius, was a commoner who through his own merit rose to the ranks to the highest position in the entire land. Right? That's the so-called American dream, isn't it? The very first multi-genius was living that dream.
Every education makes students, children more alert and more human beings. You see? Plato said that when you go to public school, you become more alert, you more wicked, your spirit is wicked. And you become a more human being. That's your character is built in a school. Next, when you go to Greek school, you see Greek school, according to Plato himself, he said that you became more alert and more human being. You became more, you see, you became a more human being. Not just human being, you became a more yourself. You achieve your destiny when you go to you became a human being, more human. You are a human being already, but a more human being. That means more wise. And when you go to chemistry school, when Plato himself compare what they do in chemistry school, I give Greek because no debate. You see, our school in Greece, the way we are doing things is just for creatures like pigs. You see, like pigs. You see, and he said myself.
So I hope you caught that. So what Europeans are saying, oh, we should try to be like the Greeks. What did the Greeks themselves say? They say our education is education for pigs. If you want real education, go to Africa. Right? What would this do if you are studying classics, but this is what you're studying? I hope you understand. Yes. It would be mind-blowing. It would change your entire orientation and understanding of yourself. Right? They're telling you be like the Greeks. The Greeks are telling you be like your own self.
I'm ashamed myself as a plate. I'm ashamed. We do things like that is a shame.
The condition of guzzling swine.
For myself, but the whole Greek world is a shame. What I can do, our education, when you compare with a Kemet, is not even for human beings, it's for just for pigs, for animals.
The condition of guzzling swine rather than human beings. Read the Greeks themselves if you want to read. You say you like the Greeks, read them.
The translation, you say, it's not very good. You say, it's a picture of a grizzly swine. You see, this is a translation. They give the word to swine because the word swine is here. With what he says more than swine is not for the cremator. That's for creator like pigs. Yes. It is for them. The way we are teaching in Greece is just good for creature like pigs. So our students are like pigs.
That's what I read somewhere. Swedenborg said that there is no wisdom in learning English because it's just erudition. It just becomes erudite. There is no wisdom in the English language.
And this is the thing, because sometimes I half jokingly say you are trying to imitate those who have fur like a dog or a wolf and whose skin looks like a shaved pig. This is what many of us are doing here in Ghana, right? So I say that also with this as the background, when I'm saying you're trying to imitate those who look like pigs. This is what we're actually saying in more ways than one. Let's continue.
But the education was no good. Yes. And he was ashamed of that. He said that in the next. The translation is still the same, I believe. The translation is still the same. Next. Yes, this will not give many translations, say it will be the same. It will say, already it's not for human beings, not for you. They have no education. You see, it doesn't belong to humanity, our education. Yeah, to the offspring, yes, you see. The offspring, it belongs to the offspring of certain pigs. You see the judgment. So we believe that the Greeks have the best education. They teach us everywhere. But you work for pigs. That is a Plato, you see, pig to compare your own education. My guy was so brilliant like a Plato to say that is just for pigs, not for human beings. Meanwhile, in Greek, in chemistry, it makes to kids more alert, more human beings. You can see how it's deep. You see?
So, had anyone ever heard of Plato before?
Yeah.
We've heard the name. Has anyone actually read anything that Plato wrote?
Yeah.
Myth of the cave.
The republics.
Okay. So this is the thing, that for many of us, it's a smoke and mirrors type of thing that they do to us. Look how great they are, but they won't give us certain information that would have a very serious impact. It's sort of like when they are bringing the imaginary white boy Jesus Christ to you, right? They'll bring you that one, but they leave all the black Madonna and Christ there in Europe. So just coming back to your point of when they bring you something, you have to always be thinking of what do they plan on benefiting from that? Why are they going to expose you to these texts but not those texts? Right?
I mean, I study Alfred Nobel. At the point in time, I decided to study most of the pioneering figures in Europe. And coming to him in particular, I was torn between his industrial processes, massive guns that killed so many people across the globe. And then here he comes and says, I have made so much money now, I want them to use it to benefit mankind. So I was like,
Produce guns?
yeah. How can that thing benefit mankind? Is it not to propagate rather than to sustain that thing? You know, it was through his industry that the maxi gun was the first to have been, crafted by a black man.
Similar to what you have said, it appears that's a very good, smart strategy.
Yeah.
I recently read a book by Naomi Klein,
Okay.
Shock Doctrine,
Shock Doctrine,
Capitalism, where she
yeah.
spoke of how Ford was instrumental in the destruction of Latin America, especially in Chile.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, this same Ford, we provided these premises to use as torture chambers for the military regime, was also giving money to soldiers to go into these countries and fight against human rights abuses. It's just similar to what you said about Africa.
There's a quote from Dead Press. This isn't a book, this is a rap group. They say, they create disease, manufacture sickness, then they rent you a cure for the symptoms. To them it's just business.
It's just like economic hitman.
So look at this.
Yeah.
What I do, I give you the sickness on this side, then I give you the disease on this side. So I have no intent. The same thing was in Laws of Poverty, right? Who was that? Graham. where he goes into this idea that if the aid industry ever was able to aid all the people, they would all be out of a job. So they have a vested interest in making sure that aid never does anything useful, right? Same thing with the so-called criminal, justice industry, right? Let's say crime stops tomorrow. Billions and billions are lost. You don't need any police. You don't need any judges. You don't need any bail bondsmen. You don't need any lawyers. You've collapsed the entire economy of that whole nation just by no crime. So then it's very interesting when you look at Crack the CIA, a documentary that talks about there are no coca farms in the projects, right? So where does the cocaine come from? There are no gun factories in the ghetto, so-called ghetto, so where are the guns coming from? Then you come to understand how all these things come together. Also, those who invest very heavily and own privatized prisons are the same ones who produce gangster rap music. And then once you get arrested, you go and produce these DVDs, CDs for free in the privatized prison to go get other people to come in there so that you can be black as defined by Europeans. So again, they've given you the sickness, so they get money off of that side. Then they give you a cure for the symptoms, not the disease, just the symptoms, so they get money on that side. Let's continue.
What's the type
So these are things.
the primary text?
This is loss. Yeah.
I give a lot of translation. The same, so let's move in the same piece. So education in Greece is founded on philosophy. Yes,
Listen to this is the point.
So if your education is for pigs, for swine, that means you don't have philosophy of education. If you don't have philosophy of education, you don't have philosophy itself. Because education, philosophy of education is just application of your philosophy first. This one, the word Sophia, philosophy, is what? Is obscure in Greek language and is a foreign language. It's a xenocon, xenoteron. It's a very strange word. Xenos, strange.
So they're saying they don't know what the word means. Where does it come from?
This is why you don't have philosophy. If you go to apply philosophy, your education back there is for
And it's a foreign origin.
They don't have a philosophy. The word philosophy is not a Greek word. You see? Yeah, they say Sophia, wisdom, did not. The Greek philosophy, this word is a very obscure in Greek language. Very obscure and of
Primary research, primary text, right?
So the word of Sophia, wisdom, is not even a Greek word. They say that and say, you don't explain this word in Greek. It's not only obscure, but it's for foreign origin, you see. The Greek text is very clear. This word education is no good. I give this guy, retranslation is no good either. So it's good if you want, try to put the better. I want the text. This text here. What makes sense? And yes, okay. So he said that the word Sophia, wisdom, is rather obscure, you repeat obscure, and is non-active. In fact, the Greek doesn't say it's not active. That means it's not a Greek word, then you have to make more simple. Because active was the Greek for attent, the most beautiful is active. So, in any dialect, it can be active, Ionian, Dorian, it's not a Greek word. You see? It's not just the Greek of Athens, the whole Greek dialect is not a Greek word. It must be like that, not just one dialect. You see? So, yes, so you can see the Sophia, the wisdom, Sophia, wisdom, is obscure in Greek. The Greek language doesn't know this word. is a borrowing word. It's a foreign language word, you see. This is why we say they don't have the philosophy, so it's difficult to apply to build your education philosophy, because you don't have a philosophy. So in Kemet, they have a philosophy, they build their education on philosophy. You see the huge difference. You see. And this is a Plato again. Yes, the same translation. I give the same translation.
So they're saying it's a foreign origin, and he'll go into it, but now come to our dictionary. That sophos is what you find here of wisdom teachings, the instructions, right? Seba, Seba, Sebait, Seba, Sebait, Seba, 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 right? So it's not just a word, it's a word talking about what the Greeks are saying. They're talking about wisdom, they're talking about the instructions. When we say instructions of Ptahotep, this is what we're talking about. Kagimni, Merikare, Harjadef. These are the names that we should be knowing, not Plato. Or you already know Plato, so you can't erase it. But in addition to that, you should make these your libation. Because when all we do is try to say, oh, the Greek said this, but it's not true, the Greek said that, what are we doing? But we're doing what I call an academic libation, right? Just like in a libation, you call the names of your own ancestors, right? Those who went before. What we end up doing is we do an academic version of a libation where we quote Plato, Aristotle, but at what point in time do we know Kagimni? Right? When do we say the names of our own ancestors? When all we are doing is critiquing what the Europeans said. What we end up doing is, just like I say, we're shifting vomit from one place to another. Let's look at food and try to work with that. So let's come back.
The same text, we can see that the way they say, many translations, they agree that is obscure, is not. You see, this word translated that wisdom Sophia is very dark. But it's obscure, how a word can be dark. It's obscure. And appear not to be of a native growth. So it's not a native word in
Not
Greek.
native growth, right?
They don't translate exactly, always try to wait. It is not obscure, not just dark, it's obscure, we don't understand. Nobody understands the word Sophia, philosophy in Greek. Wisdom, philosophy, the foundation. This one they started cosmogony like even said by chaos. It makes sense now. So Sophia, so I check, this was said by Plato, I check modern scholarship. Modern scholarship, and chiefly people study Greek etymology. And this guy, Pierre Chantraine, is one of the best in the world. He has a huge, maybe 10 dictionaries on etymology. He said that, briefly, there is no etymology. Even now, 2000, this, you see, if we publish his book in Paris, Dictionnaire étymologique de la langue grecque, the etymological diction of the Greek language, when you check, you go to the word Sophia, you say, pas d'etymologie, no etymology, there is no etymology.
Even those who are willing to.
Even that scholarship, Western scholarship, recognize that the word philosophy or Sophia, Sophos, is you can see the etymology, the beginning of this word in Greek. You see? Even now, so the Concord word Plato said long time ago. You see, there is no etymology. So I don't say something I want to say, but it is like that, is a fact. There is no etymology. Yes. So, if you see this is the word,
so unlike what the let's say Eurasian pseudo scholars do, we're not saying this to make you feel good, right? We're saying this to restore truth and ma'at in the world. That's what we're doing education for. So it's not, oh, the Greeks didn't have it, so let's pat ourselves on the back that we had it. let's go to the source text and actually see what's been hidden from you all this time. So you can in turn ask, why was this hidden from me? I hope it's clear. Asakon Okosa.
In Argentina, you have
This is what we're looking for,
Sebaid, and the Sebaid is abstraction word even. It's a kind of concept. It's a concept, Sebaid. It's a concept. You see, you have the same word in the demotic. On stage of the Egyptian language, you have the word. Demotic, you have also Seba, you see, the same. And even Coptic, you have the Sebo, Seba, the same word, you see. So you have the word through the evolution of the Greek, of the Egyptian language. And the Greek, of course, Sophos, and that means wisdom, something like that. So
when it says an abstract concept, when it says an abstract concept, this a rolled up papyrus scroll. I think we addressed this before. Whenever you see this, you know you're dealing with an abstract concept in Middle Nature, right?
The book is not about the Sophos only, but I spent at least 10 pages to explain that it came from Greek and it came from Kemet really. You must deal with linguistic level, and then you deal with cultural level, and with chronological level too, because time is a crucial, like I so used to say. So I spend time for that. So it's not just Sophia, you must ask from where we have O here, where we have a Phi, and O again, Omicron again, Sigma again at the end. So with the behavior of this word in the Greek itself. So it's difficult to find a word like this in the Greek, if you know some Greek. It's difficult, this kind of structure. It must be something very strange, you see. Indeed, it is a very strange word. So you explain each level, each letter by letter. So you must explain why this one is there, why in Egypt you have a seta, it is a P, not a F. So why it became a F in Greek? Yes, and we explain and we give some example too. Like we say neftis, but there is a nef in Medina, there is a B. Is a B. Yes. So we have kind of the R. So when you have Kemet, we know this Kemet, you have a Transi, you have a Crete. And we have the Greek word is like from New York to here, is close. It's not very far. So you have a two road to come. You can from Greece, you can go from Crete, Greece, and then Kemet. Or Greece, you go to Minor, Asia Minor, and then Kemet. Is that you go by sea by that time, by sea. It's a playo. You go by sea, you pay, you tick and you go. And we know the amount of the ticket is written by Plato in a dialogue called Gorgias. Is written, you pay 2 rubles or 6 drama. You pay the money, and from Athens and to Naucratis, you pay. Yes, it's written.
I hope you're following along, right? Yeah. So not only did they study in Kemet, they're saying this is what we paid to go and study in Kemet. This is the train fare. This is the airplane ticket, right? Just like how you go get your visa, you pay, you have the receipt. This is what they're saying. This is the boat ride across, right?
So it's not fiction. So when you check this speak, of course, they don't have education, they don't have wisdom, they don't have nothing. So, you see? And this is the starting point, you see. They don't recognize that our education is for pigs. It's written by them. They recognize that the word of this Sophia wisdom doesn't make sense to our language. That's me. Their education came from somewhere, some sense. This is why one of the founders of the church, Omer, he said that the best doctor in medicine you find them in Kemet. The best doctor to heal you, to cure you,
and your position in relationship to it. Now, when your Asians are the ones who are selecting the curriculum, they're not doing it based on, oh, I think this is the best book. They're not doing this on the basis of, oh, this is the most articulate, this is, the most profound. They're saying, how can we pretend like these are the ones who came up with philosophy without having they themselves pull the carpet from under us, right? We are coming to colonize Africa and African minds, right? Now, imagine I'm trying to colonize your mind and say the Greeks invented this, but now you're reading what the Greeks said and you come across this, right? So they're giving you very selected texts, but then they're keeping other selected texts away from you. I hope you understand how insidious and evil that is. Yeah.
So when I first came,
Intentional. But
when I first came to Legon, 19, I went to philosophy department. Very early readings. What is philosophy? This breakdown was there. The one that has just been exposed. Sophia is not a Greek word.
did they say it came from Philip?
Phil is love, right?
Right.
And Sophia is supposed to be.
The younger philosophy.
Did I forget?
Love of wisdom. Sophia, so wisdom, and then.
Yeah. And they told you it came from Clemens.
No,
Why would it do that? They said they were Greek words. Sophia and philosophy is a breakdown of these two Greek words, Sophie and Philo. One is love, one is wisdom.
As a philosopher, I love wisdom. And I feel like it makes it so exotic. Yeah, I'm studying what the Greek scholars did. It feels so.
And there was, throughout, I was there for 4 years, there was no mention of Egypt anywhere. The starting point was always Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and all those are.
Those are the philosophers.
That is a white libation. They'll tell you don't pour libations, but this is what you're doing. This is what we're all doing in this university to this day. Libations to random white folks. But now we see when we actually read what they wrote, right? Not the selected books. They say, all right, where's something that I can convince you that they did anything useful? And let's keep these other ones. Because these same white folks who brought you these Greek texts, they're the ones who did the translations. They know all of these texts are there. So when they're setting up your philosophy department, they're giving you certain ones that they know will make you a good slave. And they're keeping certain ones away from you that they know will walk you right up out of that philosophy department and into Metrometric class. Alright? And we'll close.
Now I will focus on it because the first philosopher, the first were wise. There's 7 wise only in antiquity. He's the first wise, the first philosopher, the first scientist, the first. So you can see the CV. He came from where? From Princeton, from himself, from Greek, from where? So when you check, he's a CV, he's one of the chemist students, the first student. Yes, and he went back, he built a school there first. So after we'll focus on him special, like I did in the book. Next. So let's go quick over all of them. This guy is not the picture too. This is solo. What was we give law, the law giver and Kemet. Solo. He give a law to Kemet, legislator, something like that. But he spent most of when Kemet studying in Socrates, in Science Temple, and then Leopolis, he studied them. To give a law.
Another was Thales, the so-called first Greek philosopher.
People give law in Western civilization. They want Kemet students. These are one of the first of them. Yes. Now they say the rule of law, they may spread the rule of law everywhere in the world. But they didn't start the rule of law. It was in Kemet. And these were students. In the Western civilization.
Here in Ghana, they'll say Europeans have the rule of law. Africans, we don't have the rule of law. I hope you understand. You are living out what it's like when people are insane. in the sense of having absolutely no knowledge of themselves, right? If knowledge of yourself has anything to do with insanity, what we're living through right now is about the worst case scenario, right? Maybe it's not that bad. But in terms of not knowing anything about who we are, when you see how the politics are, this is the result of not knowing who we are. When you see how the economics is, when you see how all of these different things are that you say you don't like, how did we get there? From not knowing anything about who we are or our enemies. But that should be the point of education, to show you who you are and who your enemy is. Other than that, what are you doing? Perhaps getting a degree, I don't know.
Yes, you see? Now that pretend everything belongs to them, now they give back to the world. And these also, you see, all of them, systematically, all of them, these were Pythagoras. Of course, we know Pythagoras, there is no Pythagoras, you see. When the text said that when Plato learned that these people, they have their knowledge from Kemet, so he decided to go to Kemet. Yes. And he built a school. He was one of the genius in wisdom, in philosophy, in Sophia. But they didn't have the word Sophia. So we spent 22 years in Kemet to study. In Memphis, Mennefer, in Leopolis, and he was set until 2. And he stayed there. They said, I want to know this, I want to go to the temple. They said, no. You don't go to the temple. You say, why? Because you are not circumcised, you see. You must be circumcised so you can go.
I hope you remember our discussion of circumcision and incision, so you can find the earliest, and as not to a baby like how they do now, this is your initiation. Remember our very first class on rites of passage, right? You have your rites of passage, different stages on this realm, different ones on that realm. So you're still a boy, you haven't gone through the first stage. I hope you understand. And for a woman, you're still a girl, you haven't gone through the first stage.
Yeah, to go this place, they say, look, the first Greek in the world, in history, to be circumcised is God. The first. So he can go to the higher level, to do his PhD, we can say. You see? And this is Heraclitus. When you read it, it's a copy from books from Kemet, it's exactly the same. Yes. Chiefly the concept of change. Change, transformation, happening is a Kemet. You find out everywhere in Kemet. The beat, the mood is a Kemet. So in Greek it's difficult to conceive the dynamic of the universe, the march, the motion of the cosmos. They didn't conceive that, you see. And this is Socrates.
This looks like mugshots for criminals, right?
Herodotus, you know, I don't have to tell you, he was there. You have the second book of his history is in the Kemet, so we know. Next. This is well, maybe there's a picture is not me, maybe it's real, maybe it's not fiction, but they present as culture their ancestors, you see. We do the same. Put Imhotep like this, all of them. We must do our own picture now, our own sculpture. So this Socrates didn't go to Kemet as such as Fabricano, but he said that when I was young, I hear oral tradition. That art, astronomy, geometry, even games in society, chiefly writing, tagrammata, writing came from Kemet. And he gave more detail, very detailed. Djibouti is a symbol, idea, something like that. He gave all details, so he's correct.
Associated with the moon.
He said, when I was young, I heard that all these things come from Kemet. He repeated that.
Counterpart to
so this is the wisdom, the foundation of wisdom. It came from Kemet. They recognize that. So in fact, it was not stolen legacy. No. The story in antiquity, they recognize. But when we start slavery, colonization, for 13th century, 14th century, 15th century, they changed the historiography. The way of writing history changed completely. How you can say I learn from you and make you slave? It makes no sense. You are my master, I make you slave now, I don't recognize that. I must destroy your mind. And destroy my mind too. He's one of them too, one of them. Spent 5 years in Kemet studying. When they call the father of atomic theory, he spent 5 years in Kemet studying the physics and
the theory of the atom,
nature.
right?
Next. All of them systematically. I give picture the book.
And the word atom itself, remember that was the first deity that came out of Doom.
Plato's maybe 24 dialogues. In the 12 of them, he gave a lot of detail concerning Kemet, a lot. Any kind of information you want on Kemet is a Plato. You can be king if you are not a priest. You can be something like that. A lot of information. And he's going, was there? I say, I saw in a temple picture, I saw. He said that. You see? Next, so he was there, all of them, the best intellectual in Greece, that connection. They Plato too. Next, so I give you the what he said next. Yes, see, when Plato was taught in antiquity too, in the school, they teach him too. So they say that when he learned from Pythagorean theorem, that the first principle of the philosophy came from Kemet. From Telegupto, he went, he went to Egypt. Plato went to Egypt. And when he stayed there, he left there after mastering completely. After he stayed there, the Kaisei stayed there in this country, and he left after mastering what? Geometry and hieratic science. That's mean hidden science, mysteries.
So the things that Pythagoras was supposed to have invented, we have been building pyramids with those theorems. Not like we just had it as an idea. Let's build something that will stay here for 5,000 years with these ideas. And now you're going to tell me people who just had an idea, magically out of the sky and invented it.
You see, when Aristotle is a great. So he said like, look, the old men in humanity are Kemet people, not us. They're old people. The civilization is very old. 2, mathematics starts, what we call mathematics, starts in Kemet. Why? Because the priests have a lot of time, they can study something like that. But maybe, the reason maybe it's good or not good, but he said that mathematics start in Kemet.
Not the Greeks, right?
Why
are we calling it arithmetic?
More clear in Greek, you see. Mathematica techna juste ça. Et pour Egypton. When the Egypton period doesn't mean around Kemet. So they use the translation mathematics start around Kemet when you check the translation. So I checked the perimeter, in fact, around. But I checked the best translation in Western civilization of source speak. So they don't translate around, how it can be around, there is no around Kemet and nothing. So they translate in Kemet itself is the best translation. So mathematics start, juste ça, that's the anteriority, the word anteriority is there in this kind of tense. You say juste ça. The anteriority starts first. In the beginning, start first, proton, start first. You see, he said, but then the Lord, Egyptian astronomy, he said that's the best. We would have a debate on the comet, you see. And he said, no, the way we think is not right. The best way to think about this, everybody is a Kemet people. You must know that, you see. So, all of them, We talk about him too.
So once you get a thorough understanding of what the Greeks said, go to the actual writings of your African ancestors in Medu Neter, right?
So you
see what we said ourselves.
All of them systematic, all what you call philosopher scholar. When you check one by one, you read them, where they came from, what they said themselves. All of them systematic. They have a link, connection, education with a chemistry. You see. You see, he's a king tooth, of course. You know the picture, this is one of the maps, is African guy, the leaves, the nose, everything. Now they try to change. If they give me a Chinese computer, the Tutaka will be like a Chinese. Yes, next. That's the same. You see, that's the same. So these people, they focus on education always. Yeah? Help you, my dear race. Help. That's meaning when it's educated first. African be helped without education. Education came in, make the kids more alert and more human beings. So let's help you. It's the same tradition of philosophy. You see? Yes, because Kwame Nkrumah also the same tradition. When he tried to build a consciousness, conscientism. To build African conscientism, so they must be aware of things, the awareness, be mad first. You see, even they need to know that this part of their tradition is in your blood. You don't have to learn music always, you can dance. It's part of the blood. You see, it's part of our tradition. If we come to conscientism, so we can build in you. Next, all of them. Julius, we call him a teacher. Mwalimu in Kiswahili. He's a teacher. President for Tanzania, but he's a teacher. And we never call Western president teacher. No, never. Yeah. Because in Kemet is like a Imhotep. You teaching is crucial to us. You see, teach. To teach, Sebaid, word bring back again by Esa, you see, to teach, not just to read and to spell, you see, to teach is to make more human beings, you see, to wake up his brain so he can achieve his own, like you say, his destiny, or by herself, her destiny.
That's a key point, right?
So if the Mwalimu is the
Mwalimu, help you achieve your destiny.
You see. And Jomo Kenyatta too was one of the greatest in the continent. Not just president. We must see them like they teach us Pan-Africanism. They learn us from Marcus, from Du Bois, they teach us. Let's be united. This is our way to achieve our destiny. You see, Jomo Kenyatta, we must live with our own image. We must live with our own philosopher. We must live with our own teachers. Yes. You see? Tomboya. And he said, not yet. Yeah, not yet independence. We must fight again. Not yet. Not yet. You see? Although all these people, the most brilliant African 21st century, they continue the same legacy. Next, to teach, to build your conscience and check out that job, of course. You see, to teach, he taught me many things, so you must teach. If I didn't have the contact with Shadio or Jake, something like that, I will miss something. We need the teachers, but the African way, with philosophy, with foundation, with wisdom. Not just like we do, we fight for curriculum, more mathematics, more calculus, more readings. You waste your time, in fact. Because after that, you go back to reproduce Western civilization. Yes, there is no chance.
That's the point, right? That's why they're giving you schooling, no education. To make you a carrier, like a carrier of a virus.
These are good comments. Because they say, he's a good comment. Jake is a teacher of Africa. You see, he's not to me. Instinctively, they know he was a teacher. like Julius Nyerere, like Jomo Kenyatta, like Sheikh Anta Diop,
Now you know him, Jacob Carruthers, we have one of his texts,
like
Intellectual Warfare.
you see, like this guy, all of them, you see, this is not my
When I was in Chicago, I taught at the Carruthers Center of Inner City Studies, African Communications.
You see, the teacher of Africa. Good title, teach. You teach is a responsibility. It's a teach, a transmission of knowledge, of wisdom, of goodness, of medunature, medunefer. You see, of deep thought. You must teach. Education, to teach, to nurture. You see, this is deep. Next, like Ben, Jeffries, or these Ascari. Yes, you see, it's basically teaching to study at the same time you teach. So this continent, we must map only this place too. This is our place, we must map, you see. This is a continent, you can put the 10 United States. Yeah, if we build Africa as a one, we'll be powerful than 10 times United States.
Hope y'all caught that, right?
All climate, all. We have snow, and we have everything. Grapes. We have grapes here in South Africa. They have grapes, we have we have rainforest. I came from Congo, rainforest. Rainforest, the legs of the earth. So everything, we have all kinds of climate. We have Atlantic Ocean, we have Indian Ocean, we have Red Sea, we have the Dead Sea, so we have a lot of seas. A lot of water, a lot of river, the wood, the savanna, steppes, all kind of climate, all kind of nature. It's a powerful place. So you have everything. And next. And then you can see even Kemet civilization. Kemet civilization, nothing came from outside, really. Because everything to build this civilization, and you have ebony, it came from, you have ivory, it came from south. You have even the symbol of math, the street fair, it came from south. You have gold.
This is, religion is a deification of one's culture, right? So the ostrich feather comes from the place of their origin. So you want to have a symbol of what order, righteousness, truth, justice is. You deify the place where you came from.
With Nubia, Meroe, something Napata, Boniface, Kuf went to the
Not a Chinese bird feather.
They have a connection with the.
Not a Roman bird feather. That's deifying someone else's culture.
They knew very well. You see. They went several times to an expedition. They know very well. The continent was done by them. Now they have to focus on Palestine, something like that. But everything came from here. Even Albastra, Aswan, Granite, everything came from basically the south.
So when you say you're building something, you're going to where you are oriented. Right? To build. What am I going to use to build?
You know what?
Let's use what's right here.
That food here, that food. In fact, you know what? When you have the.
I think we'll pause here. This is the link I gave you in the very first class. So when you say you want African studies, does anyone want African studies? Anyone? Does anyone want anti-African studies? All right, well, I gave you this link in order to assist you if you actually do want some African studies. This is, again, this site, Bibi Tumi Casa, right? It turned 10 years old 2 days ago, right? So if you want any information on Africa in any way, shape, or form, you can find it here. The videos, PDFs, right? So this lecture has been sitting here all semester waiting for you to look at it. So sometimes I hear students here on campus, they lament. They say, oh, there's no information about Africa because all they know is Greek stuff. And I say, if you have this site, let's say there's no other site on the entire internet, but instead what people like to do, they like to play with memes, send a meme back and forth, and this is raising our consciousness, so far. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Yeah. That if you want information, not just this site, but I'll go through this site that we have information on different languages, culture, economics, education, events, global African presence, health, history, math and science, military, movies, nation building, open forum, philosophy, politics and law, repatriation, society, spirituality, and so forth and so on, right? We also, last month, we got over 1.3 million users. So everyone in the world wants to know about Africa, but here we are in Africa and African studies, and it's like pulling teeth to try to get African people to use the same information and take advantage of it. This is information now when someone tells you the Greeks did whatever, right? Because of this information, what can you do? Warm up a nice hot capoeira, slap hot fire out of them, right? So knowledge is your protection against the Urugu virus. The next time someone tries to put this into you. Any thoughts, reactions, whatever before we close out? Also look at that video. It's Theophile Obenga and Asa Hilliard. Do you all know Asa Hilliard? I won't be angry at you. But he has one of the best translations of the instructions of Batahotep, the oldest book in the history of humanity, right? This was an African who dealt, he also has a book called Seba, this same word that Theophile Obenga has been talking about, right? Prof. Obenga has been talking about Seba. He has an entire text devoted to just this concept, this term, and how it relates to modern day education and what we need to do about education, right? So sometimes we throw our hands up and say, well, what do we do in this modern society? How can we whatever? All of this stuff has been outlawed. And you can find this information right here online. So the next time you want to waste your time on a white site talking about how we need to do for self, spend that exact same time doing what? Getting African studies to eradicate our anti-African studies.
I can't exactly quote the page, but reading Kamalu, somewhere good and evil, a point is made that African ethics is not static. It's not static. So in that context, how can you always ask the question that for you to know what is Africa, you need to know what the origin of it. So if ethics is not static, how will you know this particular view or argument expressed by this African is a change or or actually, so how will you address such a problem? Because as I am an African, so today if a thought can come over me, then I say, oh, this is appropriate. But will it be like African view and to tie it with what we usually hear, whether it's media allegations or really to you see that they say, oh, somebody has consulted a god and the god needs human blood. All this is in media or at that point is considered as appropriate. That's why the human blood is needed. How do we really know that this one is not African thoughts?
Yeah, this is very good. So when we are looking at African thought versus anti-African thought, one thing that we can do is we can, let me try to pull this up for you. Now I think we started to introduce this in one of the weeks. First off, we're talking about how ethics is not static, right? There are certain things that we have gained an understanding from. The name of this course is Foundations of African Thought, right? So what you are looking for is whatever I'm doing an outgrowth of African thought, or is it an outgrowth from Eurasian thought, right? So we've given you certain things, common elements that you found throughout African thought. You, not you specifically, but us in general, we are in a place where we are not untouched by Eurasian thought. And to a large degree, we know Eurasian thought much, much better than we know African thought, right? And this is not only because we've been to school, but because we're surrounded by fertile fields. So when we're talking about the flow of this stream, we're not saying that the stream should stay where it is or where it was, right? We're also not saying let's try to put the stream back on the mountain. Eventually it will get back onto the mountain in due time. Evaporation, precipitation, it will get back to the mountain. But what we're saying is, as opposed to it going towards white world terror domination, which is the way we've been programmed to think, because we know the name Plato and we don't know Kagemni, that's where we're going, is towards this white desert of destruction. Now we're saying, you know what? We're not saying stay here. We're saying let's now irrigate these fertile fields that are going to feed our children. That's a much better decision. So what we're saying is let's divert this stream to something that will be beneficial to African people. So this is one thing. Whatever crosses your path, whether it's a thought, action, word, deed, whatever it is, ask yourself, does it benefit white world terror domination? In our analogy, that is the desert of destruction. Or does it benefit African people, right? That's one. Secondly, think of, does this thought originate with African people or does it originate with Eurasians, right? So whatever it is, if it's a thought that comes in your head and it says, all right, this needs human blood, that's not necessarily bad, per se, right? Because it depends on who is being sacrificed. Is it your eternal enemy? Fine. If you read in ancient Kemet, after we won the battle of Kadesh and several other battles, we got some of these Eurasians, we brought them back as sacrifices and threw them over the shrines, right? So we hung them from the mast of the ship so that everyone could see we defeated these kings, so-called kings in southwestern Eurasia. Then we brought them to the temple, threw the body over the wall, and that was the sacrifice. That may not be a problem, right? But now what if our sacrifice, there's nothing but other Africans around, right? That one may be a problem. So it's not saying human sacrifice is always good or always bad, but who's being sacrificed and for what? Now, Eurasians, quote unquote, are against human sacrifice, but there's a book called Rituals of Blood by Orlando Patterson, and he looks at lynching in the South, in the US, as nothing but human sacrifice to get America strong spiritually. All of the rituals of it, where they would take off the penis.
Never had this.
Yeah, look at the Rituals of Blood, Orlando Patterson, where they would burn it. This is what do you do with sacrifices, especially among Eurasians? They burn their sacrifices, right? They castrate the African, and then they keep parts as souvenirs, right? Every single thing that they do is nothing but what you do in a ritual sacrifice. Now ask yourself, have they stopped doing these blood sacrifices to keep America strong, right? George Bush, there were more Africans who were executed under his tenure as governor of Texas, right? Look at African people being shot in the street. Their blood is flowing left, right, front, and center. What is this but ritual sacrifice? So what they will do, they will look at an African who is killing other Africans, right? And I'm saying I don't think that that's a good thing. I'm not saying I don't think that human sacrifice is always going to be bad, but I'm saying I don't think it's good for Africans to kill other Africans in that type of context. But they'll look at that and they'll say, look, it's human sacrifice. Look at how savage you Africans are. And for that one single African who was killed, and again, I don't think that's a good thing, but that one single African who was killed, there are 20 Africans who were shot in Chicago alone, right? Every single 1 year, 20 Africans killed in Chicago alone. And then beyond that, when they're filtering guns into Boko Haram, where are those coming from? Northeastern Nigeria, is there a gun factory? Is there a tank factory? Anti-aircraft missile factory? Where does that come from? Look at Eastern Congo, where they're getting the columbium and tantalite from. All of those things are ritual sacrifices to get in. Those blood sacrifices are going to strengthen someone or some nation, right? So again, if you are looking at sacrifice, look at the times where we were doing it, where we were able to stay as a nation for thousands of years. Who was being sacrificed? On what temples? For what purpose? When we got away from that, then what happened? Right? So again, this is a bit more complex than just looking at it as this thing is always good and that thing is always bad, right? But keep in mind that those same people who will tell you that this thing that you're doing is bad, look at what they're doing. Because even the old style lynchings are still present. Before we even talk about those same people who went into the Ku Klux Klan, they said, you know what, let's join the police force so that we can still kill Africans with impunity. Those are blood sacrifices. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying.
You can give me the title of Orlando practitioners.
Well, that's rituals of blood. Now, a lot of people don't like him for other reasons, but I think it's a very excellent analysis of this phenomenon, right?
I am one of those who don't.
Feel free.
What's that?
Why?
What's that by?
By his interpretation is different, it's okay.
He's a what?
So,
As a Harvard historian,
Harvard historian who doesn't, it is not balanced.
there's no balance.
Is he
Wow,
white
which
or
of
black?
his works?
Huh?
White or
I've
black?
read everything he's
Have
written.
you read what he
Is he white or black?
It's a black guy.
I think he's Jamaican, eh?
It's a black
I'm not
guy.
sure what
I mean,
I know he's black, but I'm
I
not
watched
sure.
the documentary and he speaks like he started out with the pattern.
Yeah. So, yeah, I hope that's what my articulation of that was clear. So again, in this day and age, we can say this is good, this is not good, this is bad, this is whatever. But again, try to look at the overall context of what's going on. And are the people who are saying you all are doing this type of thing, are they doing the thing 100-fold? And if so, how does it benefit them? So all this comes back to the same point that we start off with. Whatever the thing is, think about, does it benefit African people? That should be paramount to understand, is this African or anti-African? If it benefits African people, then we can say, all right, this is one up. Then beyond that, we can say, does this originate with African people? Usually there's a correlation, but not always. What we originate tends to be things that are designed to benefit us, right? What benefits us is usually the things that we originate. Again, that's not 100% of the case, but generally that's why we're doing it, right? Now, on the other side, let's look at things that Eurasians designed for us. Christianity, Islam, all the isms that we already talked about. Why are they doing that? And this is something that Akoto kept asking. It's simple, because they think it benefits them in some way, shape, or form. So now it's up to you to decide, how do they benefit from it? And usually what benefits them is detrimental to us and vice versa, right? And then beyond what does it benefit them, generally what they originate is designed to benefit them. So if they're giving you this, oh, this is a cure for this, or this is whatever for that, usually what they originate is designed to help them in some way. Economically, psychologically, health, politics, some type of area. So that's what this is about, because you can break it down, and whatever the thought, word, action, or deed is, you can categorize and say, all right, who benefits from this psychologically and emotionally, right? If I'm wearing clothes made by a Eurasian, who benefits psychologically from that? Because they're saying you all were monkeys, you weren't doing anything before we got here, and now you're saying, yes, it's true, let me wear what you're wearing. You see how they're willing to say that they are from a continent just to feel good about themselves? You can look at the map and see it's another continent, so imagine what psychological boost they get from you saying, oh yes, what you said is true, right? You're just going along with it. Let's look cultural and historical, right? Just to stay on the same idea of clothing. All right, who benefits culturally and historically from you taking this one as opposed to using your own, right? This one is usually the clearest to most people, economics, right? If I can't explain any of the other ones, economics, they say, I know who I paid, right? So you can see how they get a benefit from that. And usually what they originate is what they benefit from, and vice versa. Education and intelligence. Are you undergoing schooling or education? Who benefits, who originates? So basically in all these different areas, health, if you are sick, who benefits from you being sick? right? Who's going to rent you a cure for the symptoms when you're sick? And it's something that's become a scandal in the U.S., this link between pharmaceuticals, big pharma they call it, and the FDA, USDA, all these things, that those who are saying you need to eat this, 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 this. Well, when you get sick now, the pharmaceuticals come in. So they're telling black people, oh, you need to drink so much milk, even though you're lactose intolerant. They don't say that last part. So you drink this, so the women end up getting fibroid tumors. You know, you end up having breathing conditions, blah, blah, blah. So now they need to fix the symptoms that they created themselves. Or you need to eat this much, you know, red meat, whatever, whatever. Then recently they came out and said it's a carcinogen. It causes cancer, the processed at least, and massive amounts of even the unprocessed, right? So they're telling you this is part of the food pyramid. And now once you follow what they've told you, now we have the cure for you, for your symptoms. And we'll keep you on that cure for your symptoms for the rest of your life, right? So now we want you to die, but we want to make money off of the demising process. So we're just gonna lengthen that out as long as possible. So you keep dying subtly and slowly, right? This is your friend who colonized you. This is your friend who enslaved you. So I asked what nation was built on the genocide of one people and the enslavement of another, right? In terms of spirituality, right? This one is to a large degree linked to that one psychologically, right? So in terms of spirituality, are you praying towards Ghana 5 times a day? Or are you praying towards where some sand dweller, right? Have you made their place holy, more holier than the place where every single human being originated from? When you saw in Kemet the Ma'at feather comes from where we came from, that's people deifying who we are. But now we say, no, forget all of that. Let's pray to some piece of sand somewhere and a rock in the sand, right? So they're benefiting psychologically from that and spiritually. It's so devious, but it's so smart at the same time. Because if you can get people to go for it, right? Socially, that when you do all of these things, let's say you're praying to a rock in the sand, now on a social level, you have to go interact with these people who are the owners of the rock in the sand at least once in your lifetime. They benefit economically from you praying to that rock in the sand. So you have to interact with people who you otherwise wouldn't need to interact with, right? Economics is nothing but social relations. To say I'm going to go into the store and interact with you, transact, interact, that's all economics is an agreement that I'm going to see you once a week, every week. That's social relations. And they're saying that that link, that rope between us, you're not going to be able to break it, right? Forced social relations, or even better, manipulated, political, so forth and so on. So I hope that answers your question. Anything, if you want to know if it's African or anti-African thing, does it benefit you or is it to your detriment? Usually what's to your detriment is to someone else's benefit, and vice versa. So they don't want you to do things that benefit you. All right. So I think we'll close there. I hope everyone has turned in your assignment.
Yes.
If not, I'm not taking late assignments.
Where late is what time?
Huh?
Where late is what time?
Late is 5 p.m.
Seriously?
It's past 5. It's past 5.
Yeah, you have until this class. Or you had until this class. It actually should have been 2, but I decided to give you an extension.
Please, if you've not selected a chapter, please let me know.
So you are reading from some other kind of blog and then bring chapter
I'm
inside.
sorry, but I'm also trying to get this off my.
I hope everyone found today's lecture informative, especially Theophilo Benga.
Yeah.
Now, he used to be at San Francisco State University. Imagine if you have that as a professor, right? Instead of reading classics and saying, oh, look at how great these Greeks are, let's actually read what the Greeks were saying, right? And on top of that, he knows Middle Netra in and out. He reads the entire 600-page grammar of Egyptian grammar every summer for fun.
For fun.
For fun. So that's the teacher of my own mathematics teacher.
And he speaks French, English.
He knows everything. He knows everything.
Everywhere just to read. Have you settled on the chapter?
So no, thank you for that.
Can you let me know? Because
I'll let you know. The eye opening.
because I want to send a list right now. That's why.
And cross-reference it, right? Look at the primary sources. Don't just look at what someone is telling you. Look at the primary sources to see, is this actually what it is? Then once you know what it is, see how come they didn't tell you about this, right?
Yes.
For whose ultimate benefit?
Yeah, they've changed. Wait, your name is not even.
The system of oppression and educator is either a liberator or an oppressor himself, right? Yeah.